Hello, welcome to the channel. Before starting the story, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. It's very important to me. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button. All of this because Tom stood at the edge of the Shoshone National Forest, his heart racing with anticipation. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the rugged terrain that lay before him. Years of experience as a backpacker had led him to this moment, a solo adventure that promised solitude and a deep connection with nature. He adjusted the straps of his well-worn backpack, feeling the comforting weight of his gear, a tent, sleeping bag, food supplies, and a trusty map. As he stepped onto the narrow trail, the sound of crunching leaves beneath his boots echoed in the stillness, a rhythmic beat that accompanied his excitement. The forest enveloped him like a warm embrace, the towering pines standing sentinel on either side. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting playful shadows on the forest floor. Tom breathed in deeply, the scent of earth and pine filling his lungs, invigorating him. Each step felt purposeful, a dance with the wilderness that had always called to him. He had spent countless weekends in nature, but this time felt different, more profound. Perhaps it was the thrill of venturing alone, the promise of self-discovery that lay ahead. After a few hours of hiking, Tom reached a picturesque clearing, a hidden gem nestled among the trees. A small brook babbled nearby, its soothing sounds mingling with the rustling leaves overhead. "This is perfect," he murmured to himself, a smile spreading across his face. He quickly set to work, pitching his tent with practiced ease. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that danced across the ground as he secured the last peg. As the sun finally set, Tom gathered twigs and branches for a fire, the crackling sound of kindling igniting bringing him a sense of peace. The flames flickered to life, casting a warm glow in the encroaching darkness. He settled down in front of the fire, the heat radiating against his skin, and gazed up at the sky. Stars began to twinkle into view, a breathtaking array of light against the velvety backdrop of night. "Incredible," he whispered, feeling utterly alive in this moment of tranquility. "Just me and the stars," he said aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. The solitude was comforting, and he found himself reflecting on the stresses of everyday life, the deadlines, the noise of the city, the constant buzz of technology. Here, he felt liberated. As he sat there, lost in thought, he leaned back against a log and closed his eyes, allowing the sounds of the forest to envelop him. The crackling fire, the distant rustle of leaves, and the soft gurgle of the brook created a symphony of nature that calmed his mind. "I could stay here forever," he mused, feeling a profound sense of belonging. But as the night deepened, an unsettling feeling crept over him. It was subtle at first, a faint whisper of unease that he tried to dismiss. The forest, usually a friend, began to stir with an unknown energy. He shook his head, trying to dispel the feeling. "Get a grip, Tom," he muttered to himself. Perhaps he was just tired. He stood up and walked a short distance from the fire, stretching his legs. The shadows danced around him, and for a fleeting moment, he felt as if he were being watched. He stopped in his tracks, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "It's just the woods," he reassured himself, but the feeling lingered, an unwelcome companion. As he returned to his fire, the sound of cracking branches echoed through the trees, startling him. Tom's heart raced, and he turned sharply, his pulse quickening. Probably just a deer, he told himself, though doubt gnawed at him. He had hiked enough to know that the forest was alive, full of creatures that moved silently through the underbrush. He settled back down, trying to focus on the warmth of the fire and the beauty of the stars above. But the forest had other plans. The cracking sounds persisted, growing closer, and a shiver ran down his spine. Okay, that's not a deer, he muttered under his breath, his mind racing with possibilities. Taking a deep breath, he decided to distract himself. He rummaged through his backpack for a book, hoping to lose himself in its pages. Just a few chapters before bed, he said, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. But the persistent noises outside continued, gnawing at his concentration. Minutes passed, and the sounds of the forest began to shift. The once comforting rustle of leaves morphed into a series of sharp snaps, each one echoing louder than the last. Tom's heart raced as he flipped through the pages of the book, struggling to focus. "It's just a branch," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. The uneasy sensation that something was lurking just beyond the firelight grew stronger. "Maybe it's just a squirrel," he reasoned aloud, glancing around as if expecting to see a small creature darting into the shadows. But the forest remained silent, save for the unsettling sound that seemed to echo in rhythm with his heartbeat. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the air, and Tom felt the urge to check his gear one last time. He stood up, brushing off the dirt from his pants, and walked over to his backpack. As he unzipped it, the sound of another branch snapping sent a jolt of fear coursing through him. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Okay, just breathe," he said, trying to calm the growing storm of anxiety within him. He rummaged through his supplies, the familiar feel of the items grounding him momentarily. "You've done this 100 times, he murmured, but the words felt hollow. Outside, the sounds continued, and Tom felt the world around him shift. The whispers of the forest began to feel menacing. "Is someone out there?" he called, his voice trembling slightly. No answer came, only the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the brook. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows, but the darkness remained still and unyielding. "I'm being ridiculous," he chided himself, though his instincts screamed otherwise. Despite his efforts to reassure himself, unease settled deep within him. He took a moment to collect his thoughts, forcing himself to breathe deeply. "I'm just tired." "It's been a long day," he said quietly, but the words felt like a fragile shield against the creeping dread. As night deepened, the forest transformed. The shadows grew longer, and the air turned cool and heavy. Tom returned to the fire, stoking the flames, but the warmth felt distant, almost inadequate. He could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, thick and suffocating. The sounds of the forest had shifted into a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, as if something was moving just beyond the reach of his firelight. "Maybe I should turn in early," he said, more to the fire than to himself. A part of him yearned for the safety of his tent, but another part wanted to stay awake, to confront whatever lay beyond the flickering light. With a heavy sigh, he made his way back to his tent, the fabric a thin barrier against the vast wilderness. As he zipped it closed, he felt a sense of isolation wash over him. The familiar sounds of the forest faded into an eerie silence, broken only by his own breathing. Lying in his sleeping bag, Tom listened intently, the earlier sounds now amplified in the stillness. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, made his heart race. "It's just the forest," he repeated like a mantra, but the words offered little comfort. The darkness outside felt alive, a restless energy that sent chills down his spine. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, desperately trying to will himself to sleep. Yet sleep eluded him, and the night dragged on, filled with the unsettling sounds of the forest. He felt trapped in a dream where shadows danced just beyond his vision, where the line between reality and fear blurred. Eventually, fatigue overwhelmed him, pulling him into a fitful sleep. But even in slumber, the sounds of the forest haunted him, whispering secrets he couldn't quite grasp, leaving him with a sense of foreboding that would linger long after the night had passed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Shoshone National Forest transformed into a realm of shadows. Tom sat by the crackling campfire, staring into the flames, lost in his thoughts. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional call of an owl. But amidst this chorus, a new sound emerged, a sharp crack, like a twig snapping underfoot. Startled, Tom's head snapped up, his heart racing slightly. Probably just a deer, he muttered to himself, shaking off the unease that crept over him. Minutes passed, and just as Tom began to settle back into the comforting rhythm of the fire, a second snap echoed through the trees, louder and closer this time. His pulse quickened, and a chill ran down his spine. He glanced around the clearing, straining his ears against the night's silence. "Hello," he called out, his voice breaking the stillness. The only response was the whisper of the wind through the trees, mocking his sudden anxiety. The thought of a deer or some other harmless creature was slipping away, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Tom stood up, brushing the dirt off his pants, and decided it was time to check his gear. He moved to his tent, the fabric rustling softly as he rummaged through his backpack. Just a little paranoia, he reassured himself, pulling out his flashlight and ensuring his pocket knife was within easy reach. Nothing to worry about. But the woods had other plans. As he stepped out again, flashlight in hand, the sound of snapping branches grew more frequent, echoing around him like a heartbeat of the forest. Tom's breath hitched as he swept the beam of light across the trees, illuminating the rugged bark and the dense underbrush, but finding nothing. "Get a grip, Tom," he whispered, forcing himself to breathe steadily. "It's just the wind or maybe a raccoon." Yet, the forest felt different now. The shadows loomed larger, the darkness deeper. Tom could feel every hair on his neck standing on end, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. He decided to make his way back to the fire, hoping the warmth would dispel the creeping dread. As he reached the flickering light, he felt a momentary sense of safety, but it was short-lived. The snapping continued, closer still, almost as if something was circling him. "What the hell is going on?" he murmured to himself, throwing another log onto the fire, the flames leaping higher in response. The crackling wood provided a small comfort, but Tom's mind raced with possibilities. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He stared into the forest, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. "It's just your imagination," he said aloud, trying to convince himself. "You've hiked these trails alone before." But something was different this time, and he could feel it deep in his bones. He sat down by the fire, trying to focus on the warmth and the crackling sounds of the flames. Yet, the noise from the woods persisted, a relentless reminder of the unknown. "Okay, maybe I should just call it a night," he said, rising to his feet. Gathering his gear felt like a chore, but he needed to regain control over the situation. As he unrolled his sleeping bag, the snapping noise grew louder, and he paused, the bag slipping from his hands. "Are you serious?" he exclaimed, glancing back towards the tree line. "What is it?" He felt foolish for talking to the shadows, but the tension in the air was palpable. It was as if the forest had come alive with a malevolent presence. He shook his head and crawled into his tent, zipping it up tightly. The thin fabric separated him from the outside world, but it did little to dispel the growing anxiety that thrummed in his veins. Tom lay in the dark, the sounds of the forest now a cacophony of crackles and rustles. He tried to close his eyes, but sleep eluded him. Minutes turned into hours, and the darkness felt suffocating. Every creak of the tent made him jump, and every sound outside felt amplified. "It's just the woods," he whispered into the fabric of his sleeping bag, trying to soothe himself. "You've hiked alone before. You're fine." But as the night wore on, the noises intensified, a rhythmic cracking that seemed to draw nearer with each passing moment. Tom's heart raced, and he could feel the sweat pooling at the nape of his neck. He dared to peek outside, unzipping the tent slightly to shine his flashlight into the night. The beam sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing but the stillness of the trees. Yet, the sounds continued, echoing all around him. It was a haunting melody of the wild, one that danced on the edge of his sanity. "Maybe it's just an animal," he mumbled, but the words felt hollow. Deep down, he knew something was wrong. He lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag tightly around him as if it could shield him from whatever lurked outside. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, each rustle of leaves a reminder of his vulnerability. Hours passed, and just when he thought he might finally drift off, a sound like heavy footsteps echoed from the trees, followed by a loud crack. Something big had stepped on a branch. Tom's breath caught in his throat, and adrenaline surged through him. "No way," he whispered, his mind racing. "I must be imagining things." But deep down, he knew he wasn't. He bolted upright, his heart pounding, and shone the flashlight toward the sound. For a moment, the beam caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape darting between the trees. Tom's breath quickened, and he fought against the rising panic. "What is that?" he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. He felt the sweat pooling on his brow, the air thick with apprehension. "Okay, Tom, just breathe," he told himself, his thoughts swirling. "It's probably just a bear or something." Yet, as he sat in the darkness, his mind conjured images of larger threats, something more sinister than just a wild animal. He couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted, of being prey in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. The footsteps faded, replaced by an eerie silence, and he felt a strange compulsion to step outside, to confront whatever was out there. "If it's just a deer, I'll be fine," he muttered under his breath, trying to summon courage. He unzipped the tent slowly, the sound echoing in the stillness, and poked his head out, flashlight in hand. The forest was quiet now, too quiet. The fire's embers glowed softly, casting a warm light that felt comforting yet surreal. He scanned the area, the beam shaking slightly in his grip. "Is anyone there?" he called out, his voice trembling. Silence hung heavy in the air, and he felt a deep sense of dread wash over him. "Come on, Tom, it's just the woods," he muttered, forcing himself to step out of the tent. As he stood there, the cool night air wrapped around him, and he felt the weight of the forest pressing in. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his mind. "You're just being paranoid," he reassured himself, but the whisper of doubt lingered. The darkness held its secrets, and as he moved further from the light of the fire, he couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching him. The shadows danced just beyond the reach of his flashlight, and a sudden gust of wind sent a shiver down his spine. "Okay, time to get back," he muttered, stepping toward the tent. But as he turned, he heard it again, a sharp crack, closer this time, like a heavy footfall on the forest floor. His heart raced, and before he could think twice, he turned and ran, adrenaline propelling him forward. "No, no, no," he gasped, the branches scratching at his arms as he plunged deeper into the woods. The ground was uneven, roots snagging at his feet, but he couldn't stop. The woods that had once felt like a refuge now felt like a maze of terror, every step echoing with the sound of his fear. He stumbled, falling into a small ravine, the world spinning around him. Pain shot through his body as he landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. As he lay there, disoriented and alone, the silence enveloped him once more, and in that silence, he knew he had to face whatever darkness lurked in the shadows. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when Tom settled into his sleeping bag, the warmth of the fire slowly fading into the cool embrace of the night. The stars twinkled overhead, scattered like diamonds across the vast expanse of the sky, but the beauty of the Shoshone National Forest did little to calm his racing mind. As he lay there, exhaustion tugging at his eyelids, the familiar sounds of the forest began to shift. The melodic chirping of crickets, once a soothing lullaby, now felt like an ominous backdrop to the unsettling noises that had begun to pierce through the tranquility. Crack! The sharp sound of a breaking branch echoed through the trees, jolting Tom awake. He shot up, heart pounding in his chest. Just a deer, he muttered under his breath, forcing himself to breathe deeply. But the rational explanation did little to ease the anxiety creeping into his bones. He strained his ears, listening intently, hoping to catch the sounds of the forest returning to its natural rhythm. Another crack, closer this time. Tom's pulse quickened. He swung his head towards the darkness, peering into the thick shadows cast by the towering pines. "Hello," he called out, his voice trembling slightly. The forest remained silent, save for the whisper of the wind through the branches. He felt foolish for talking to the night, yet a part of him yearned for a response, a reassurance that he was not alone. As minutes turned into an hour, Tom's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just a small animal, he thought, trying to shake off the growing unease. Yet each rustle in the underbrush felt like a predator stalking him, inching closer with every passing moment. He pulled his sleeping bag tighter around him, wishing for the comfort of home, the familiarity of his own bed. The quiet of the forest, once inviting, now loomed like a dark cloud over him. With a sigh of resignation, Tom crawled out of his sleeping bag and decided to check his gear. He fumbled around in the dim light of his headlamp, looking for anything that might offer a distraction. He pulled out his map, tracing the routes he had planned for the next day. Maybe a hike deeper into the woods will help, he mumbled to himself, trying to convince his racing thoughts. Get away from whatever is out there. But as he stood there, the persistent sound of cracking branches continued, echoing through the trees like a taunt. He felt trapped, a sense of dread building within him. Get a grip, Tom, he whispered, shaking his head. You've done this 100 times before. Yet, each snap and rustle felt like a reminder that he was far from the safety of civilization. The hours dragged on, and fatigue began to weigh heavily on him. He tried to close his eyes, but sleep eluded him, the relentless sounds of the forest keeping him on high alert. Just when he thought he might drift off, a loud crack resonated, louder than before. This time, it was accompanied by a low, guttural growl that sent chills racing down his spine. He shot up, heart pounding, eyes wide with fear. "Okay, that's not a deer," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Panic surged within him as the growl echoed again, closer this time, mingling with the sound of branches snapping underfoot. Tom's mind raced back to the stories he'd heard about the wildlife in the area, bears, cougars, creatures that could easily turn a solo hike into a nightmare. He felt the weight of his decision to hike alone pressing down on him like a heavy stone. Gripping the edge of his sleeping bag, he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Just stay calm," he repeated, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. As dawn began to break, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. Tom felt a flicker of hope, the light pushing away the darkness that had settled over him during the night. He knew he had to move, to get away from whatever had been stalking him. "I'll hike further in," he decided, gathering his gear with shaking hands. "If I can just put some distance between us, I'll be fine." With his backpack secured, Tom stepped onto the trail, the cool morning air refreshing against his skin. The sounds of the forest began to wake up around him, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, but the memory of the growl lingered like a shadow at the back of his mind. He pressed on, determined to shake the fear that had wrapped itself around him like a vice. As he hiked deeper into the woods, he tried to focus on the beauty surrounding him, the vibrant greens of the foliage, the soft babble of a nearby brook. Yet every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent his heart racing anew. "It's just my imagination," he told himself, but the words felt hollow. "Come on, Tom, it's just a hike," he muttered under his breath, trying to convince himself. But the unease clung to him, an unwelcome companion that wouldn't let go. He quickened his pace, the trail winding up a small hill, and as he crested the rise, he paused to catch his breath. Looking out over the expanse of trees, he felt a momentary sense of peace wash over him. Yet, that tranquility was short-lived. The underbrush below shifted, and he caught a glimpse of movement. His heart dropped. It was just a deer, its curious eyes locked onto him for a brief moment before it bounded away into the thicket. "See? Just a deer," he reassured himself, though the sound of cracking branches persisted, echoing through the woods like a relentless drumbeat. Pushing through the growing tension, Tom continued his hike, navigating the winding trail with a sense of urgency. Each step felt heavy, the weight of his paranoia pulling at him as he tried to shake off the feeling of being pursued. The forest closed in around him, trees looming like sentinels, their branches swaying as if whispering secrets he was not meant to hear. He glanced over his shoulder frequently, half expecting to see the dark figure of whatever had haunted him the night before. "Focus on the trail, Tom," he muttered, shaking his head in frustration. "You're just being paranoid." But with every snap and rustle, the shadows seemed to grow taller, darker, and more menacing. As he pressed on, he began to notice the trees around him. Something about their trunks caught his attention. Deep gouges marred the bark, claw-like marks that sent a chill racing down his spine. "What the hell?" he breathed, stepping closer to inspect the damage. The gouges were too deep for a simple animal. Something larger and far more dangerous had been here. Tom's heart raced as he backed away from the tree, the forest suddenly feeling much smaller, more claustrophobic. He quickened his pace, eager to put distance between himself and the marks that seemed to tell a story he was not ready to hear. "Just keep moving," he urged himself, the mantra echoing in his mind like a lifeline. But the forest had other ideas. As he navigated through the dense underbrush, his foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling forward. He stumbled to regain his balance, adrenaline coursing through him as he caught himself just in time. "Whoa, that was close," he muttered, shaking his head as he pushed himself back to his feet. The momentary lapse in focus only heightened his awareness of the dark presence lurking just beyond the trees. With a surge of determination, Tom continued on, convinced that he could outpace whatever was following him. The trail began to descend into a small ravine, the steep drop ahead prompting a moment of hesitation. He peered down into the shadowy depths, the ground sloping away into darkness. "Maybe I should turn back," he thought, a voice of caution rising in his mind. But the thought of retreating, of allowing whatever had stalked him to catch up, was unbearable. "No, I can't go back," he whispered fiercely to himself, steeling his resolve. "I have to keep moving." With renewed determination, he took a careful step forward, feeling the ground shift beneath him. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees, the sound like a gunshot in the stillness of the morning. Panic surged through him as he lost his footing, the world tilting at an alarming angle. He stumbled, arms flailing as he tried to regain his balance, but the ground gave way beneath him. Tom tumbled into the ravine, the world spinning into chaos as he fell, a cacophony of sounds drowning out his thoughts. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, the fear and adrenaline merging into a singular sensation of terror. As he fell, he could hear the rustling in the underbrush above him, the sounds he had tried to outrun now racing alongside him. Tom's heart raced as he plunged deeper into the Shoshone National Forest, the relentless echo of snapping branches resonating in his ears. It was early afternoon, but the sun seemed to retreat behind a blanket of ominous clouds, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters among the towering pines. He had spent the last few days embracing the solitude of the wilderness, but now a creeping dread began to claw at the edges of his mind, urging him to reconsider his decision to hike alone. As he navigated the narrow trail, Tom's eyes were drawn to the peculiar marks etched into the bark of the trees. Deep, jagged gouges ran vertically along the trunks, some so wide he could fit his fist into them. Each scar appeared fresh, the wood still raw and splintered, as if a great force had raked its claws against the trees. He paused, feeling a shiver crawl down his spine, his breath hitching in his throat. What could have done that? He muttered to himself, his voice barely rising above the whisper of the wind. Just some deer, or maybe a bear, he reassured himself, shaking his head as if to dispel the anxiety that threatened to engulf him. Yet, as he continued along the path, the unsettling thoughts lingered, feeding his paranoia. He quickened his pace, every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig igniting a primal instinct to flee. When he stumbled upon a small ravine, the sheer drop made him halt. The ground sloped steeply downwards, a jagged cliff of rocks and underbrush that led into darkness. Tom leaned over the edge cautiously, peering into the shadowed depths. "This doesn't look good," he whispered, the sound of his own voice seeming alien in the stillness. The ravine was not only treacherous but also a stark reminder that nature could turn malevolent in an instant. "Maybe I should turn back," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see something lurking behind him. But the trail behind him was empty, shrouded in the growing shadows of the forest. Yet something compelled him forward, a mix of curiosity and an inexplicable urge to confront whatever was haunting him. Just a little further, he thought, attempting to quell the unease gnawing at him. He took a deep breath and stepped back onto the trail, his eyes darting around as he continued his trek. The forest seemed to tighten around him, the trees leaning in as if eavesdropping on his thoughts. Every snap of a branch sent his heart racing, each rustle of leaves felt like a warning. He pressed on, determined to put distance between himself and the disquieting marks on the trees. Suddenly, as he navigated a particularly rocky section of the path, his foot slipped on the loose gravel. Time seemed to slow as he felt himself teetering, the world around him tilting dangerously. "No! No!" he shouted, panic surging through him as he flailed for something, anything, to grab onto. But it was too late. He lost his balance and careened over the edge of the ravine, the ground vanishing beneath him. The world spun in a chaotic blur of greens and browns as he tumbled down, crashing into the underbrush. He landed hard, a jarring impact that sent shockwaves of pain radiating through his body. Gasping for air, Tom blinked against the sudden darkness that enveloped him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, and his heart raced as the reality of his situation set in. "Great job, Tom." "Just perfect," he groaned, pushing himself up to a seated position. His body ached, and he winced as he assessed the damage. Scrapes and bruises marred his arms and legs, but nothing seemed broken. "I can't believe I let this happen," he muttered, frustration mingling with fear. He glanced up at the rim of the ravine, the trees now looming like silent judges, and felt a wave of despair wash over him. "Hello? Is anyone out there?" he called out, his voice trembling as it echoed through the hollow. The silence that followed was deafening, amplifying the thudding of his heart in his chest. He felt utterly alone, the weight of the forest pressing down on him. The sounds of the woods, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock his plight. Tom glanced around, trying to get his bearings. The walls of the ravine were steep and rocky, but he could see patches of light filtering through the trees above. "I need to get out of here," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty swirling within him. He pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky, and began to assess the walls of the ravine for a way back up. As he scanned the area, he caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye. His heart skipped a beat, and he turned to face the direction of the disturbance, every nerve in his body on high alert. "Is someone there?" he called, his voice echoing in the stillness. No response. His pulse quickened, and he fought the rising tide of panic. "Get a grip, Tom," he chastised himself, trying to focus on climbing out rather than what might be lurking in the shadows. He took a few steps toward the nearest wall, looking for handholds in the rock. "I can't stay here," he murmured, determination pushing him forward. But before he could make any progress, a distant sound broke the silence, a series of voices, faint but unmistakable. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" he shouted, hope flaring in his chest. The voices grew louder, a chorus of calls echoing through the trees as they approached. "Tom. Tom, are you there?" one voice called, filled with urgency. "Over here," he shouted, waving his arms frantically. Down in the ravine. He could hear footsteps now, the crackle of twigs and the rustle of underbrush as the rescuers drew closer. Relief washed over him, but a new wave of fear crashed over him as he recalled the strange noises that had haunted him throughout his trip. "What if they're not alone?" he whispered, glancing nervously around the ravine. "Tom? We're coming," a voice shouted, cutting through his thoughts. The rescuer's presence felt like a lifeline, pulling him back from the brink of despair. He could see them now, two figures silhouetted against the light of the trees above, descending carefully into the ravine. "Just hold on. We'll get you out," one of the rescuers shouted, a ranger in a bright orange vest leading the way. "Be careful," Tom called back, his voice nearly breaking. As they reached him, Tom felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank God you found me," he exclaimed, relief flooding through him as he leaned against the rocky wall for support. "Let's get you out of here," the ranger said, assessing Tom's condition. "You look banged up. Did you fall far?" "Just a little ways." "I'm okay, I think," Tom replied, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his fear. He couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had been watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The second ranger, a woman with a reassuring smile, knelt beside him. "We've been searching for you since we received reports of strange noises in the area. We're glad you're safe." She glanced around the ravine, her expression shifting subtly. "But we need to get you out quickly. The woods can be unpredictable this late in the day." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of their concern. "I heard something that didn't feel right." His voice trembled as he spoke, memories of the eerie sounds flooding back. "I thought I was alone, but I wasn't so sure." "Let's focus on getting you to safety first," the ranger urged, offering Tom a hand. "We can talk about it on the way back." Together, the three of them began the ascent, Tom's heart racing not just from the physical exertion but also from the unshakable feeling that they were not alone in the woods. As they climbed, the shadows deepened around them, and the forest seemed to close in once more. The branches rustled ominously above, and every snap felt like a warning. "Stay close," the woman said, glancing around as if sensing the same unease that clutched at Tom's gut. "We'll get you to safety." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of their presence beside him, yet the deeper shadows of the forest seemed to whisper secrets he was not meant to hear. As they reached the top of the ravine, he paused to catch his breath, glancing back down into the depths. The fear that had gripped him earlier clawed at him once more, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching him, a presence lurking just beyond the veil of the trees. "Let's keep moving," the ranger urged, her voice steady and calming. "We'll head back to the main trail and get you to the ranger station." Tom nodded, forcing down the unease that threatened to spiral back up. "Right. Let's go." As they moved away from the ravine, the shadows shifted behind him, and the forest sighed, a deep, unsettling breath that echoed in the silence. Tom cast one last glance back, a chill running down his spine as he felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. He turned forward, his resolve hardening. He had to get out of the woods, out of the grasp of whatever had been haunting him. But Tom's consciousness drifted back to awareness, but the world around him was a murky haze. He blinked against the dim light filtering down into the ravine, the branches above swaying gently, seemingly indifferent to his plight. Pain radiated from his shoulder, which he instinctively cradled with his other arm. The sharp ache reminded him of the fall, the abrupt, disorienting tumble that had sent him crashing down into this dark crevice of the forest. The eerie silence enveloped him, amplifying his fears. No rustling leaves or distant animal calls broke the stillness. He felt exposed and vulnerable, a lone figure lost in a wilderness that felt increasingly hostile. He turned his head slowly, scanning the walls of the ravine, the steep earth rising like a fortress around him. The air was heavy with the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, and a chill settled into his bones. "Hello?" Tom called, his voice sounding weak and strained, barely rising above a whisper. The effort of speaking sent a wave of pain through his shoulder, and he winced, biting back a groan. He strained to listen for any sign of life, heart racing as he recalled the unsettling noises that had plagued him throughout his trip. The snaps of branches, the whispers in the dark, all of it replayed in his mind like a sinister soundtrack. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been following him had finally found its opportunity. Then, faintly at first, he heard them, distant voices. Relief washed over him, mingled with a lingering sense of dread. "Help," he shouted, forcing the words through the tightness in his throat. "I'm down here." The voices grew louder, but they were not the frantic shouts he had anticipated. Instead, they were calm, almost methodical, as if they were accustomed to searching for lost souls in the woods. A moment later, a figure appeared at the edge of the ravine, silhouetted against the fading light. "Tom, can you hear me?" A man's voice echoed down to him, firm and reassuring. "Yes, I'm here," Tom replied, trying to project confidence. "I fell. I'm hurt. Stay calm. We're coming down." The man, clad in forest green, began to lower himself into the ravine, carefully navigating the rocky terrain. As he descended, Tom felt a flicker of hope. Another figure joined the first, and soon there were two rangers at the bottom, kneeling beside him. One was a sturdy man with a grizzled beard, while the other was a younger woman with piercing blue eyes that surveyed him with concern. "Tom, can you move?" the woman asked, examining him with a steady gaze. "I think so. Just my shoulder, it hurts like hell." He winced as he shifted slightly, testing his body. "Let's take a look," the bearded ranger said, carefully assessing Tom's injuries. "You've got some bruising and maybe a sprain, but it looks worse than it is. We'll get you out of here in no time." "Thanks," Tom replied, his voice shaky. "I thought I was alone down here." "You're not alone anymore," the woman assured him, giving him a small smile. "We've been searching for you since we got the call." "What happened?" "I was hiking alone," Tom began, his voice trembling as he recounted the events. "I heard noises in the woods, and I thought I was imagining things. But then I saw, I don't know, some kind of marks on the trees. They were deep, like claw marks. I was so distracted that I didn't watch my footing and, well, you know what happened next." The rangers exchanged a glance, the bearded man's brow furrowing. "Claw marks?" What kind of marks? Like something was tracking me, Tom continued, his heart racing. I felt like I was being watched, and then I fell. Did you see anything? Any animals? The woman pressed, concern etching her features. No, just the sounds. But it felt wrong. Like something was out there, waiting. The bearded ranger nodded, a grave expression overtaking his face. We've had reports of unusual bear activity in this area recently. They've been more aggressive than usual, but we haven't seen anything like what you're describing. Just stay calm, we'll get you out of here and back to safety. As they prepared to lift him out of the ravine, Tom felt the weight of the forest pressing down on him, the shadows growing longer with the setting sun. The ranger secured a harness around him, and Tom gripped the straps tightly, his heart pounding. On 3, we're going to pull you up, okay? The woman instructed. Okay, Tom breathed, feeling the adrenaline surge through him. 1, 2, 3. Together, they pulled, and Tom felt himself rising, the walls of the ravine narrowing as he ascended. Every inch felt like an eternity, the tension in his shoulder flaring with each movement. Finally, with a final effort, they pulled him over the edge. Tom collapsed onto the soft forest floor, gasping for air as the rangers knelt beside him, checking him over once more. Are you okay? The woman asked, concern lacing her voice. Yeah, Tom managed, still catching his breath. Just a little shaken. Understandable, the bearded ranger replied, helping him sit up. Now, let's get you back to the trail. We'll have a medic waiting for you. As they began to lead him back, the rangers kept the conversation flowing, trying to distract him from the lingering fear that wrapped around his mind like a vine. How long were you out here? The woman asked, glancing back at him. 3 days, Tom replied, recalling the isolation he had felt. I thought I was prepared, but I guess being alone messed with my head. The bearded ranger chuckled softly. It can do that, especially in the wilderness. It's easy to let your imagination run wild out here. Yeah, you have no idea, Tom muttered under his breath, thinking back to the strange sounds and the feeling of being stalked. They continued along the trail, the forest growing darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. The shadows danced around them, and Tom couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the trees. Just a little further, the woman reassured him, her tone steady. We're almost there. As they walked, Tom caught snippets of their chatter about previous rescue missions and the oddities of the forest. You wouldn't believe the things we've encountered out here, the bearded ranger said, shaking his head. Some folks think they see ghosts in the woods. Ghosts? Tom echoed, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. I'd settle for just a bear at this point. A bear is the least of your worries, the woman replied, her voice dropping slightly. There have been reports of something else out here, something more unsettling. Tom's heart sank. What do you mean? The bearded ranger cut in, just rumors, really. Some hikers have claimed to see strange figures in the distance, shadows that don't belong. But we chalk it up to paranoia or exhaustion. Sounds like what I experienced, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought I was just losing it. Just keep your eyes open, and don't hike alone again, the woman advised, her expression serious. It's easy to get lost in your own head out here. As they approached the ranger station, the warmth of the lights spilling out into the night felt like a sanctuary. The sounds of the forest faded, replaced by the crackling of a fire inside and the laughter of other rangers. Once they stepped inside, Tom felt a wave of relief wash over him. The smell of coffee and the chatter of voices surrounded him, a comforting embrace against the darkness outside. Let's get you checked out, the woman said, guiding him toward a chair. You need to rest. Thanks for rescuing me, Tom said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Just doing our job," the bearded ranger replied with a grin. "But remember, the wilderness can be unpredictable. Always be aware of your surroundings." As they tended to his wounds and offered him a warm drink, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something dark still lingered in the woods. The shadows seemed to whisper, and the memories of the strange noises and the feeling of being hunted clung to him like a second skin. "Tom," a voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see the woman returning. "Yeah?" he asked, his heart racing. "We found something," she said, her expression grave. "What do you mean?" His stomach dropped. "Just some tracks near the ravine. They were mixed with bear prints, but there were also something else. Something that looked almost human." Tom's heart raced, the chill of realization sweeping through him. He had not been alone at all. Tom sat in a small, dimly lit ranger station, the air thick with tension and uncertainty. The walls were adorned with maps of the Shoshone National Forest and photographs of various wildlife that called the area home. After his harrowing experience in the woods, the familiarity of the station felt both comforting and suffocating. He could still feel the ache in his body from the fall, but the emotional weight of what had happened was far more burdensome. His mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days, the breaking branches, the distant rustling, and the haunting feeling of being watched. The rangers were gathered around a table, their expressions grave. Tom listened intently as they discussed the latest developments regarding his situation. One ranger, a tall man with a weathered face named Jack, leaned over the table, studying a series of photographs. "We found bear tracks near the ravine, but there were other prints too," he said, his voice low and serious. "Footprints that don't match any known animal in this area." Tom's stomach twisted at the implication. He had felt it, the sensation of being stalked, of something far more sinister lurking just beyond the trees. "What do you mean human-like prints?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly despite his attempt to remain composed. Jack looked up, his brow furrowed. "They're not quite human, but they're close. Larger than a normal human footprint, and they had unusual markings, almost like claws." "Claws?" Tom echoed, his heart racing. The memory of the strange gouges on the trees surged back, fueling his anxiety. "You mean to tell me that something was out there with me, something that wasn't just a bear?" Before Jack could respond, the door to the ranger station burst open, and another ranger stumbled in, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. He held something tightly in his hand, and as he approached, Tom's heart sank. The ranger was clutching his backpack. "Tom," the ranger gasped, "you need to see this." Tom's breath caught in his throat as the ranger opened the bag and pulled out a bloody journal. It was unmistakably the journal of the missing hiker, the one whose story had sent a chill down Tom's spine when he first heard about it. He could see the pages were frayed and stained, filled with frantic scrawls that seemed to reflect a mind unraveling. What's in it?" Tom stammered, his hands trembling as he reached for the journal. "Read it," the ranger urged, his voice barely above a whisper. Tom opened the journal, his eyes scanning the pages filled with the hiker's desperate handwriting. The words described a descent into madness, a spiral that began with strange noises in the woods, just like what Tom had experienced. "I can hear them watching," one entry read. "At night, the trees whisper secrets, and I'm not alone. They follow me." Tom's hands shook as he turned the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The hiker detailed encounters with unexplainable phenomena, shadowy figures darting between the trees, the sensation of breath on his neck when no one was there, and a pervasive feeling of dread that seeped into his bones. "I should have never come here," another entry lamented. "I can feel them closing in on me. I don't know how much longer I can last." "Tom, are you okay?" Jack's voice broke through the fog of fear that enveloped him. Did he ever find help? Tom asked, his voice barely audible. Did he make it back? The ranger shook his head solemnly. No. He was reported missing months ago. We've been searching for him ever since. We thought he might have wandered into a dangerous area or encountered an animal. Tom's mind raced with possibilities, the pieces of the puzzle coming together in a horrific realization. He was out there, just like me. Alone. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. And whatever was out there, it found him. It was watching me too. Jack stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Tom's shoulder. You're safe now, Tom. We're going to make sure nothing happens to you again. But we need to know everything you experienced. It could help us understand what we're dealing with. Tom took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. It started with the noises. The snapping branches. I thought it was just wildlife, but it kept getting closer. Then I found those marks on the trees. Marks? The ranger asked, leaning in closer. What kind of marks? They were deep gouges, like something had clawed at them, Tom explained. I thought it was just a bear at first, but now, he hesitated, the fear clawing at him again. Now I'm not so sure. The rangers exchanged worried glances, the gravity of Tom's words settling heavily in the room. We've seen strange things in these woods before, Jack admitted. But nothing like this. We'll need to investigate further. As the conversation unfolded, Tom felt the weight of dread settle over him like a heavy cloak. What if whatever it is comes back? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We'll have a team out there tonight, armed and ready. We won't let anything happen to you, Jack reassured him, though the uncertainty in his eyes contradicted his words. Tom nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. What if it was waiting for me to be alone again? What if it's still out there? Just then, a loud crash echoed from outside the station, followed by frantic barking from the ranger's dogs. Tom's heart raced as he exchanged nervous glances with the others. What was that? He asked, his voice a frantic whisper. Jack moved toward the door, his expression grim. Stay here, Tom. We'll check it out. Tom watched as they moved outside, the heavy door closing behind them with a thud that seemed to resonate in the silence. His heart pounded in his chest, and he felt a sense of isolation creeping in. Sitting alone in the dim light of the station, he could almost feel the shadows pressing in around him, as if they were alive, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Minutes felt like hours as he waited, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be lurking just outside. He could hear the distant rustling of leaves and the occasional bark of the dogs, but it did little to soothe his frayed nerves. The journal lay open on the table in front of him, the hiker's desperate words echoing in his mind. They follow me. Finally, the door swung open, and the rangers returned, their faces grim. Nothing out there, Jack said, though the uncertainty in his voice made Tom's stomach twist. But we'll keep a watch throughout the night. Tom's breath caught in his throat, and he nodded, though the fear gnawed at him. I don't want to be alone anymore, he admitted, his voice trembling. I can't shake the feeling that something is out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment. You're not alone, Tom, Jack assured him. We're here. We'll make sure you're safe. But even as he spoke, Tom could see the doubt in the eyes of the other rangers. They were trained for emergencies, for wild animals and natural disasters, but what could they do against the lurking darkness that defied explanation? As the night deepened, the atmosphere in the ranger station grew heavy with unspoken fears. Tom sat at the table, the journal in front of him, flipping through the pages again, searching for something, anything, that could provide clarity. He read the last entry, the hiker's frantic scrawl almost illegible. I can hear them getting closer. I think they want me. If anyone finds this, please. Tom slammed the journal shut, a surge of panic overwhelming him. I can't do this, he whispered to himself, feeling the walls close in. I can't stay here. Tom? Jack's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. You all right? No, Tom replied, his voice shaking. I need to leave. I can't stay here another minute. Jack exchanged a quick glance with the other rangers before stepping closer. I understand, but it's not safe out there right now. We need to figure this out first. I don't care. Tom snapped, the fear boiling over. I'd rather take my chances out there than stay here and wait for whatever that thing is to find me. Tom, please, Jack said, his tone firm but kind. We want to help you, but you need to trust us. Tom took a deep breath, trying to rein in his panic. What if it's already found me? What if it's just waiting for me to let my guard down? The rangers looked at each other, and in that moment, Tom felt the weight of their shared fear. He was not just a hiker lost in the woods, he was a man haunted by the shadows of the Shoshone, forever marked by the unknown and the lurking danger that seemed to seep into every corner of the forest. Finally, the decision was made. They would stay the night in shifts, ensuring that Tom was never alone. As the hours dragged on, Tom found himself sitting beside the flickering light of a lantern, the sounds of the forest outside blending into a haunting symphony of rustles and whispers. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for the moment when he would let his guard down. The rangers in the heart of Missouri's Mark Twain National Forest, the sun began to rise, casting a golden hue over the dense canopy of trees. Sarah stood at the edge of the forest, her heart racing with excitement. Today was the day she would finally embark on her long-awaited mapping expedition, a journey to uncover the geological mysteries hidden within the ancient woods. Clad in rugged hiking boots and equipped with a well-worn backpack filled with essential tools, she took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp morning air filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and pine. As she stepped onto the narrow trail, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet punctuated the stillness of the morning. The forest was alive, yet she felt an unusual sensation, a strange chill that seemed to cling to the air around her, as if the trees themselves were watching her every move. Shaking off the feeling, Sarah adjusted the straps of her backpack and pressed on, her mind racing with thoughts of the geological formations she hoped to uncover. Just you in the wilderness, Sarah, she murmured to herself, a smile creeping onto her lips. This is what you've trained for. After a couple of hours of hiking, she reached a clearing that opened up to a spectacular vista of rugged rock formations. The sunlight danced upon the surfaces, revealing intricate layers of sediment that told a story of ancient geological processes. Sarah quickly unpacked her tools, setting up her equipment with the precision she had honed over years of study. She calibrated her compass, ensuring her readings would be accurate. Come on, little guy, she said, chuckling softly as she adjusted the compass needle. Let's find some treasure today. But as she began her mapping, the atmosphere shifted. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down her spine. The temperature dropped suddenly, causing her breath to plume in front of her. Sarah frowned, glancing around. It felt as if the forest was alive, its ancient secrets simmering just beneath the surface. Okay, focus, she told herself, shaking her head to dispel the creeping unease. Just another day in the field. As she delved deeper into her work, the compass needle began to spin erratically, dancing wildly as if possessed by some unseen force. Confusion washed over her. She held the compass up to her eyes, squinting at the dial, but it continued to whirl, defying all logic. No, she muttered, frustration mounting. This can't be happening. Panic started to creep into her thoughts. She had trained for this moment, prepared for the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared her for a malfunctioning compass. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She glanced around, searching for any familiar landmarks, but the towering trees seemed to loom over her, their gnarled branches casting long shadows that danced ominously in the dimming light. "Okay, Sarah, you can do this," she whispered, trying to reassure herself. "Just retrace your steps." She attempted to navigate back the way she had come, but the forest, thick with underbrush and tangled roots, seemed to shift around her. The path she had followed was now obscured, swallowed by the relentless greenery. The towering trees, once friendly companions, now appeared as foreboding sentinels, whispering secrets she could not hear. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, Sarah found herself standing before a massive rock formation that jutted out of the ground like a monstrous tooth. It was unlike anything she had seen before, the dark surfaces glistening under the muted sunlight, hinting at the presence of magnetite. Her curiosity piqued. She approached the formation with caution, the earlier unease bubbling back to the surface. "Maybe I can take some samples," she thought, her scientific mind pushing through the fear. This could be a significant find. As she knelt before the rock, her hands trembling slightly, she felt a sudden drop in temperature, the air around her thickening. It was as if the forest held its breath. She began to chip away at the rock's surface, collecting small samples to analyze later. The sound of her hammer striking the stone echoed in the silence, amplifying her growing sense of isolation. "Just you and the rock," she said softly, attempting to lighten the mood. "Nothing spooky about this at all." But as she worked, a disconcerting silence descended, enveloping her like a shroud. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of birds, the rustling of small creatures, had vanished, leaving only the rhythmic thud of her hammer. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone. Suddenly, a rustle in the underbrush jolted her from her concentration. She turned sharply, her heart racing as she scanned the area. "Hello," she called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, thick and suffocating. Sarah's instincts kicked in, and she felt a primal urge to flee, to run back to the safety of the trail. But her curiosity, that insatiable drive that had led her to become a geologist, pushed her to stay. With a deep breath, she turned back to her work, focusing on the task at hand. Yet, the unease lingered, gnawing at her thoughts. Each echo of her movements felt amplified, as though the forest itself was aware of her presence. She was intruding in a realm that had existed long before her time, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on her chest. Minutes turned to hours as she collected samples, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows that twisted and turned like specters in the dusk. She knew she needed to set up camp soon, as darkness was creeping in, but the thought of spending the night in this eerie place filled her with dread. Just a bit longer, she decided, her voice barely a whisper against the oppressive silence. "I want to make sure I have enough samples." Finally, as the last light of day began to fade, she reluctantly packed up her tools, her mind racing with thoughts of the strange energy emanating from the rock formation. The chill in the air had deepened, wrapping around her like a cold embrace. Once she had collected her samples, she turned to retrace her steps, her heart thudding in her chest. The forest was now a labyrinth, each tree and rock looking eerily similar to the last. The shadows deepened, and the once familiar path felt foreign and unwelcoming. "Okay, time to set up camp," she murmured, trying to instill confidence in herself. "Just find a clear spot and get the fire going." After a few minutes of wandering, she stumbled upon a small clearing, a perfect spot to set up her tent. The moon had risen, casting a ghostly glow over the forest, illuminating her surroundings in an ethereal light. She quickly set to work, pitching her tent and gathering dry leaves and twigs for a fire. As she struck the flint, the sparks flew, and soon a small blaze flickered to life, casting warmth and light into the gathering darkness. As she sat by the fire, the crackling flames providing a sense of comfort, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. Shadows flickered in the corners of her vision, and the trees swayed gently, as if whispering secrets to one another. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, trying to ward off the chill that seeped into her bones. Just the wind, she told herself, trying to remain calm. Just the wind. But the eerie atmosphere permeated her thoughts, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking just beyond the firelight. The forest, once a place of wonder, now felt like a trap, filled with unseen eyes and muffled sounds. As the night wore on, the sounds of the forest shifted. The usual chorus of nocturnal creatures was replaced by an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Exhausted, Sarah leaned back against a tree, her eyes growing heavy as she struggled to stay awake. Just a little rest, she murmured, allowing her eyelids to flutter closed, the warmth of the fire lulling her into a state of uneasy slumber. But sleep did not come easily. The forest was alive with whispers, and the shadows danced just beyond her vision. Each crack of a twig or rustle of leaves sent her heart racing, and she fought against the encroaching exhaustion, desperate to stay alert. "Stay awake, Sarah," she whispered to herself, gripping the flashlight tightly in her hand. "You're fine." Yet, despite her best efforts, her eyelids grew heavier, and she succumbed to the pull of sleep, her dreams haunted by the dark shapes that loomed just beyond her consciousness, the forest's secrets beckoning her to unveil them, even as they threatened to consume her whole. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the once vibrant hues of the forest began to darken into ominous shades of blue and black. Shadows crept among the towering trees, and Sarah felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere around her. The air grew colder, and the rustle of leaves took on a more sinister tone. Her heart raced as she realized she was truly alone in this vast expanse of wilderness, the thrill of discovery now overshadowed by an encroaching sense of dread. Just moments before, Sarah had stumbled upon the unusual rock formation that had captured her attention. The formation was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its dark surfaces shimmered with a strange metallic sheen, glistening under the last rays of sunlight. It jutted out from the earth like a jagged tooth, its angles sharp and foreboding. As she approached, a chill ran down her spine, an instinctive warning that something was not right. She knelt down to gather samples, her hands trembling slightly as she carefully scraped away the surface of the rock. The magnetite glimmered in her flashlight, casting eerie reflections that danced across her skin. "What in the world are you?" she murmured to herself, her voice barely breaking the oppressive silence surrounding her. The tranquility of nature was now a deceptive facade, and she could feel it weighing heavily upon her. As she worked, the world around her seemed to grow still, the usual cacophony of the forest inexplicably muted. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, everything had faded into a suffocating quiet. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something unknown. Each scrape of her tool against the rock felt amplified, echoing in the void of silence. "Okay, Sarah, focus," she said aloud, needing the sound of her own voice to combat the encroaching unease. She carefully placed her samples into a secure container, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of her equipment. "Just need to get some measurements, and then I'll set up camp before it gets too dark." But as she turned to gather her other instruments, she felt a sudden, inexplicable sensation wash over her, a prickling awareness that she was being watched. She paused and scanned her surroundings, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. The trees stood tall and unyielding, their branches entwined like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. Yet, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of ice upon her, lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. "Is anyone there?" she called out, her voice wavering slightly. The silence that followed was deafening, and she took a cautious step back toward the formation, her instincts screaming at her to leave. With the last traces of sunlight receding, Sarah made the decision to set up camp nearby, hoping to find some comfort in the familiarity of her gear. She hurriedly set up her tent, her movements frantic as the shadows deepened around her. With each passing moment, the forest transformed, becoming a labyrinth of dark shapes and whispering winds. "Just a few more minutes," she muttered to herself as she struck the final stake into the ground. "Then I'll light the fire and everything will feel normal again." She fumbled through her backpack, retrieving her fire-starting kit, and soon enough, the warm glow of flames flickered to life, casting a small circle of light against the encroaching dark. As she settled beside the fire, the crackling flames provided a temporary reprieve from the chill that had settled in the air. Sarah pulled out her notebook, determined to document her findings before exhaustion overtook her. But as she scrawled her notes, the weight of the day began to press heavily on her eyelids, the exhaustion of the hike and the stress of her situation threatening to pull her under. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sound that made her heart stop, a low growl, deep and resonant, drifting through the trees. She froze, the pen hovering over the page, her breath caught in her throat. The fire flickered, casting long shadows that danced around her tent like phantoms. "Please, just an animal," she whispered, trying to convince herself. "It's just a deer, or maybe a raccoon." Yet deep down, she knew that this was different. The growl was too low, too deliberate, and it sent a shiver coursing through her spine. "Hello," she called out again, her voice steadier than she felt. "Is someone there?" The only response was the rustling of leaves, as if the forest itself was mocking her fear. With a deep breath, Sarah reached for her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. "I'm not afraid of you," she shouted, trying to infuse her words with bravado. But as she swept the light across the trees, the shadows seemed to deepen, concealing whatever lurked just beyond her sight. The growl came again, closer this time, more distinct. Panic surged within her, and she quickly gathered her equipment, her fingers fumbling as she fought to maintain her composure. "Think, Sarah. You're a geologist. You know how to handle this," she reminded herself, but the primal urge to flee was overwhelming. "Maybe I should just pack up and head back," she muttered, glancing nervously toward the path she had come from. The darkness loomed, swallowing the way she had arrived, leaving her feeling trapped. The fire crackled, its warmth a stark contrast to the chilling fear that wrapped around her like a shroud. Determined to quell her fear, Sarah forced herself to stay put for a moment longer, trying to regain her bearings. She remembered the compass that had spun wildly earlier, its needle now a haunting reminder of her disorientation. "I need to stay calm," she said, her voice a whisper in the vast silence. "I'll just wait until morning. I can't make any rash decisions at night." Yet, as the minutes passed, the growls faded into an eerie silence, replaced by the unsettling sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the whispering wind that seemed to carry secrets of its own. Sarah's heart raced as she sat on the cold ground, the fire now the only barrier between her and the unknown. With each crackle of the flames, she felt the weight of the forest pressing in on her, as if it were alive and aware of her presence. "I should have brought someone with me," she lamented, her thoughts spiraling into what-ifs. "Or at least told someone where I'd be." Just then, the air shifted, and she felt an unnatural energy enveloping her, a pulse that seemed to resonate from the very ground beneath her. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body remained frozen in place, gripped by an unseen force. The sensation was intoxicating, drawing her closer to the rock formation she had discovered earlier. Maybe it's just the magnetite, she thought, her mind racing with the possibilities of what she had encountered. There could be something unique about the magnetic fields here. But even as she rationalized, a part of her bristled at the thought that something more sinister might be at play. Suddenly, a shadow darted at the edge of her vision, and she spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the thick darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of authority and fear. The shadows seemed to shift, coiling around her like tendrils, and she could have sworn she saw eyes glinting back at her from the trees. "Show yourself," she shouted, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest was silent, but she could feel the air thickening, the tension rising like a storm about to break. She stood up, ready to fight or flee, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. As the shadows danced in the corners of her vision, she realized that the unsettling energy emanating from the rock formation was growing stronger, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. "I have to know what this is," she thought, the scientist in her battling with the primal fear rising within her. With a deep breath, Sarah stepped closer to the formation, the light of her flashlight revealing the jagged edges and dark surfaces in greater detail. The magnetite shimmered ominously, and she felt a compulsion to touch it, to connect with the earth beneath her feet. "Where are you hiding?" she whispered, reaching out as if the rock itself could answer her. But before she could make contact, the growl returned, louder and more menacing, resonating through the trees. The sound sent her heart racing, and she stumbled backward, the light flickering as her hand trembled. "No, no, no," she gasped, her instincts screaming at her to retreat. Just then, the fire crackled violently as if responding to her fear, sending sparks flying into the night. She turned, her heart pounding, and saw the flickering shadows swirling in the darkness. "I have to go," she thought, panic surging through her as the weight of isolation pressed down on her. As she made the decision to retreat to the safety of her tent, a chilling realization washed over her. The forest was alive, and it was watching her. The very ground she stood on felt sentient, the trees loomed like ancient sentinels, and the shadows whispered secrets she was not meant to understand. "Tomorrow," she whispered fiercely to herself, determination igniting within her. "I will explore it all tomorrow." But as she retreated to her tent, the shadows seemed to stretch and reach for her, and unfathomed the night enveloped the forest like a thick blanket, suffocating and oppressive. As Sarah lay in her sleeping bag, the warmth of the fire flickering nearby offered her a fragile sense of security. Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The sounds that surrounded her were not the comforting rustles of nocturnal creatures she had come to expect. Instead, they were punctuated by sharp cracks of twigs snapping and low growls that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. She turned on her side, her heart thudding in her chest, straining to identify the sounds in the darkness. A chill ran down her spine as she imagined eyes watching her from the shadows, an instinctual fear that gnawed at her rational mind. Sarah inhaled sharply, trying to steady her breathing, but the air felt thick and heavy with tension. The flickering light of the fire cast eerie shadows that danced among the trees, morphing into shapes that seemed almost alive. Suddenly, a swift movement in the periphery of her vision made her bolt upright. Grabbing her flashlight, she fumbled to switch it on, her hands trembling. "Hello," she called out, her voice wavering. There was silence, followed by another rustle, closer this time. "Is anyone there?" The only answer was the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves, and the growl, a deep, guttural sound that sent her heart racing anew. With a flick of her wrist, the flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a knife. It illuminated the trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers against the night sky. But there was nothing. Just the forest, silent and foreboding, as if holding its breath. Sarah's pulse quickened, each beat echoing in her ears. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. Minutes dragged on, feeling like hours, as she forced herself to remain alert. She could hear her own heartbeat, a steady drum that matched the rhythm of her rising anxiety. What was out there? Was it an animal? Or something far worse? She turned the flashlight off, saving the battery, and listened intently. The low growls had ceased, replaced by the sound of her own ragged breath. It was a reminder that she was still alive, still in control, at least for now. Eventually, fatigue began to creep in, curling around her like the tendrils of mist that often rose from the forest floor. She fought against it, knowing that sleep would leave her vulnerable, but her eyelids grew heavy, and she succumbed to a restless slumber, the shadows of her fears mingling with her dreams. When dawn finally broke, casting pale light through the trees, Sarah awoke with a start. The fire had died down to mere embers, and her surroundings felt foreign, almost unwelcoming. Sitting up, she rubbed her eyes and surveyed her campsite, confusion flooding her senses. The area was in disarray. Her samples, which she had carefully organized the night before, were scattered across the ground as if a whirlwind had torn through her belongings. Panic surged through her as she scrambled to gather the samples, her mind racing. "Where are they?" she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. It was then that her gaze fell upon the ground, a chilling sight that froze her blood. Etched in the dirt, unmistakable and terrifying, were the words, "You shouldn't be here." Her heart raced, the realization that someone, or something, had been here while she slept settled heavily in her stomach. Who had done this? Was it the forest itself that had conspired against her? She felt an overwhelming urge to flee, to escape the oppressive weight of the ominous message that loomed over her. But where could she go? Her compass had betrayed her, spinning aimlessly the day before, and the path she had taken was lost in the labyrinth of the woods. "Think, Sarah, think," she urged herself, forcing her mind to focus. It was time to gather her wits and figure out her next steps. She hastily packed her belongings, her hands moving with urgency. As she worked, her thoughts spiraled. Had it been a prank? Or was it a warning? The forest was known for its mysteries, but she had never imagined stepping into something so sinister. "Okay, just breathe. You need to get out of here," she said aloud, her voice a shaky anchor in the chaos of her thoughts. With one final glance at the eerie inscription, she turned to face the tangled underbrush ahead. The path that had once seemed inviting now loomed dauntingly, cloaked in shadows that danced between the trees. Stepping cautiously, she felt the crunch of twigs underfoot, the sound echoing in the stillness. Each step felt like a violation of the forest's quietude, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The whispers of the trees seemed to grow louder, a cacophony of warnings that she couldn't decipher. She pushed forward, her instincts screaming at her to keep moving. Hours passed as she traversed the winding paths of the forest, each turn revealing more of its secrets but leading her no closer to safety. The sun hung high in the sky, but the dense canopy overhead cast long shadows that twisted and turned, distorting her sense of direction. The trees, with their gnarled branches, felt like they were closing in on her, creating a maze that spiraled deeper into the wilderness. "Is anyone out there?" she called out again, her voice tinged with desperation. There was no response, only the rustling leaves and the distant sound of water flowing. A part of her longed to follow the sound, believing it could lead her to a creek or a road. But another part of her hesitated, warning her that the forest was not to be trusted. Just then, she noticed something glinting in the underbrush, a flash of metal. Curiosity piqued, she approached it cautiously. It turned out to be an old compass, its needle stuck, much like her own. A shiver ran down her spine as she picked it up, the weight of it heavy in her palm. "What happened to you?" she murmured, the eerie feeling of being watched creeping back into her mind. The compass felt wrong, as if it held memories of those who had wandered too far and never returned. She dropped it, unable to shake the feeling that it was a cursed object, another sign that she was not meant to be in this part of the forest. She resumed her trek, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest was alive with sounds she had never noticed before, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and something else, something that sent a chill down her spine. It was a low, rhythmic humming, almost like a chant, vibrating through the air. She stopped dead in her tracks, straining to hear. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and she felt an inexplicable pull toward it. It was as if the forest itself was beckoning her, luring her deeper into its embrace. Against her better judgment, Sarah followed the sound, pushing through the thick underbrush. Each step felt like a step into the unknown, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But the humming was magnetic, a siren's call that resonated in her bones. She stumbled through the trees until she broke into a small clearing, and there she stopped, her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the clearing stood an unusual rock formation, the same one she had encountered the day before. It loomed before her, its dark surface gleaming ominously in the dappled light that filtered through the trees. The humming resonated from it, a deep, throbbing sound that seemed to vibrate through her very being. "What is this place?" she whispered, half to herself, half to the forest that surrounded her. She took a step closer, the magnetic energy pulling her in. The ground beneath her feet felt alive, thrumming with an ancient power that both fascinated and terrified her. "Sarah," a voice called, breaking her trance. She spun around, heart racing, to find a figure emerging from the shadows. It was a man, tall and rugged, with wild hair and an intense gaze that seemed to bore into her soul. "You shouldn't be here," he warned, his voice low and urgent. I know," she stammered, taken aback by his sudden appearance. "I got lost. I didn't mean to intrude." His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, the humming growing louder, almost drowning out their conversation. "You don't understand. This place is not safe. You must leave before it's too late." "I can't just leave," she replied, desperation creeping into her voice. "I need to find my way back." "No," he snapped, the urgency in his voice piercing through her fear. "You don't understand the power of this place. It's alive, and it doesn't take kindly to intruders." The ground shook beneath her feet, and she stumbled, gripping the rock formation for support. "What do you mean? What is this place?" He glanced back at the formation, his expression a mixture of fear and reverence. "It's a gateway, a threshold to something beyond our understanding. You have to get away from it." Sarah's heart raced as she processed his words. "A gateway? To what?" As if in response to her thoughts, the humming intensified, vibrating through her entire being. She felt a pull, an urge to step closer, to touch the rock, to understand. "What are you doing?" the man shouted, panic lacing his voice. "I don't know." As Sarah pressed deeper into the Mark Twain National Forest, her heart raced with an odd mix of determination and dread. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, the dense underbrush clawing at her legs as if the forest itself was trying to hold her back. The air was thick with humidity, and the once familiar sounds of nature transformed into a cacophony of foreboding whispers. Her mind raced with the memory of the chilling message she had found etched into the dirt: "You shouldn't be here." The words echoed in her mind like a dark omen, urging her to turn back, yet her curiosity propelled her forward. After what felt like hours of wandering, Sarah stumbled upon an area where the trees receded and the ground sloped downwards, revealing a hidden cave entrance. It was partially obscured by vines and debris, as if nature was trying to keep its secrets buried. She hesitated for a moment, the weight of her isolation pressing down on her. The forest had become a labyrinth, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. However, the promise of discovery was too enticing to ignore. She brushed aside some of the vines and stepped cautiously into the darkness of the cave. Inside, the air was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. The cave walls glimmered faintly in the light of her flashlight, revealing intricate markings carved into the stone. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to examine them. The etchings depicted scenes of figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, surrounded by swirling patterns that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. It was a chilling tableau of those who had ventured too far into the woods, their faces contorted in expressions of terror. "Who are you?" she murmured to herself, tracing a finger over the markings. "What happened to you?" As she moved deeper into the cave, the feeling of being watched intensified. The shadows around her seemed to stretch and shift, and the air vibrated with an uncomfortable energy. She could almost hear the whispers of the past, warning her to leave. But the geologist in her pushed back against the growing fear. This was a discovery that could rewrite history, a chance to uncover the secrets of a forgotten civilization. Suddenly, the ground beneath her feet trembled, a low rumble resonating through the cave. Sarah's heart raced as she stumbled back, her flashlight flickering as if it too could sense the impending danger. The tremor grew stronger, and loose rocks began to tumble from the ceiling, sending dust swirling into the air. Panic surged within her. She had to escape. "Get out! Get out now!" she shouted to herself, her voice echoing in the confined space. With a surge of adrenaline, she turned to flee, but the cave had other plans. The entrance she had come through had begun to collapse, large boulders crashing down and blocking her exit. "No! No, no, no!" she cried, scrambling back deeper into the cave, searching for another way out. The tremors continued, and the markings on the walls seemed to shift in the flickering light, their meanings slipping away into the chaos. Sarah's mind raced. She had to find a way out before it was too late. Just as she thought she could hear the faintest hint of water trickling somewhere deeper in the cave, the ground gave one last violent shake. She stumbled, falling to her knees as rocks rained down around her. In a moment of sheer desperation, she pushed herself up and ran toward the sound of water, praying it would lead her to safety. As she rounded a corner, she found herself in a larger chamber. The air was thick with humidity, and a small underground stream wound its way through the rocky floor. The cave's walls glistened with moisture, and Sarah could see faint outlines of more markings, though they were blurred and indistinct. "Please, let there be a way out," she whispered, her voice trembling. She knelt beside the stream, taking a moment to catch her breath. The sound of water was oddly calming, almost as if it was beckoning her to follow it. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs as she steadied herself. "Okay, Sarah. Just keep moving," she encouraged herself, pushing up from the ground. She followed the stream, its gentle flow guiding her through the darkness. As she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led deeper into the heart of the forest, into something ancient and powerful. The passageway narrowed, and the air grew cooler, the darkness pressing in around her. Her flashlight beam danced across the walls, illuminating more of the strange markings. They seemed to tell a story, a warning perhaps, of those who had come before her. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine as she recalled the expressions on the faces depicted in the carvings. Were they trapped here too? What had happened to them? "Just keep going," she muttered under her breath, forcing her legs to move even as dread clawed at her insides. The stream led her to a bend in the cave, and she hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But the sound of rushing water urged her on, and she rounded the corner with trepidation. What she found left her breathless. The cave opened into a vast chamber, illuminated by an otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The rock formations were unlike anything she had ever seen, with smooth surfaces that shimmered like glass. In the center of the chamber, a large pool of water reflected the light, creating a mesmerizing dance of colors that flickered across the walls. "Wow," Sarah breathed, stepping closer to the edge of the pool. The water was crystal clear, revealing the smooth stones that lay beneath its surface. It felt surreal, almost magical. For a moment, she forgot the terror of being lost and alone. As she gazed into the depths of the pool, she thought she saw movement beneath the water. Shadows swirled, and for a brief moment, she thought she could make out shapes that resembled the figures from the cave's markings. Her heart raced as she squinted, trying to focus on the shadows. "Hello," she called out, her voice shaking. "Is anyone there?" The water rippled in response, and a chilling laugh echoed through the chamber, reverberating off the walls. Sarah's heart dropped, and her instincts flared to life, urging her to retreat. She took a step back, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. The cave was alive, and it seemed to be aware of her presence. "Get a grip, Sarah," she whispered to herself, trying to quell the rising panic. "It's just your imagination." But deep down, she knew that something was very wrong. The forest had been watching her, and now it seemed the cave was too. Suddenly, the ground shook violently again, snapping her back to reality. The laughter faded, replaced by the sound of cracking rock. The cave was unstable, and she needed to leave before it collapsed entirely. Turning away from the pool, Sarah retraced her steps, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed, that unseen eyes were watching her every move. The markings on the walls seemed to close in around her, their meanings becoming more sinister with each passing moment. Just a little further, she urged herself, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can do this." The cramped passageway felt like a tomb, the darkness pressing in on her as she hurried back toward the entrance she had come through. As she approached the spot where she had entered, her heart sank. The rocks had fallen even more, sealing the exit completely. A wave of panic washed over her, and she felt her breath quicken. "No, no, no," she gasped, clawing at the rocks, but they were too heavy. She sank to her knees, the weight of despair crashing down upon her. "Help," she shouted, her voice breaking. "Somebody, please." But the only answer was a deafening silence, broken only by the distant sound of water flowing through the cave. Just when she thought all hope was lost, a flicker of movement caught her eye. From the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness, its features obscured. Sarah's heart raced as she scrambled to her feet, her instincts screaming at her to run. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure stepped closer, revealing a face etched with lines of age and wisdom, eyes that sparkled with an unsettling glint. "You seek the truth, do you not?" the stranger asked, their voice smooth yet haunting. "I just want to get out of here," Sarah replied, her voice rising in panic. The figure smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent chills down her spine. "The forest has chosen you, Sarah. You must understand the power that lies within these woods." "What are you talking about?" she gasped, stepping back. "I don't want any part of this." The figure's smile widened, revealing an unsettling calmness. "You are already part of it, whether you want to be or not." As the realization settled in, Sarah felt the ground tremble once more, and she knew she was running out of time. She had to escape, and she had to do it now. "Get away from me," she yelled, turning to flee down the passageway. The figure's laughter echoed behind her, wrapping around her like a shroud as she raced through the dark. With every step, the shadows seemed to reach for her. The cave alive, the air was thick with tension as Sarah emerged from the cave, a cloud of dust swirling around her like a shroud. The sunlight filtering through the trees felt distant, almost foreign, as if it were mocking her misfortune. She paused, taking a moment to steady herself, her heart pounding in her chest. The echo of the cave's collapse still reverberated in her mind, a reminder of how precarious her situation had become. She was lost, utterly and completely, within the labyrinthine embrace of the Mark Twain National Forest. The forest loomed around her, its towering trees casting elongated shadows that danced ominously in the light. She felt a disquieting shift in the atmosphere, as if the woods themselves were whispering secrets she was not meant to hear. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, the underbrush thickening as if to ensnare her. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her breath coming in short gasps. It was time to move, to find her bearings again. But which way? The compass, now useless, had led her astray, and she was left to navigate by instinct alone. As she ventured deeper, the oppressive silence of the forest weighed heavily on her. The rustling of leaves and the occasional call of distant wildlife were mere reminders of how isolated she truly was. Just as despair began to creep in, she spotted a flicker of movement through the trees. Her heart raced with a mix of hope and apprehension. Were these figures friendly, or were they another manifestation of the forest's dark energy? Pushing through the dense underbrush, Sarah stumbled into a small clearing where she was met by a trio of locals. They stood in an informal semicircle, their expressions a curious blend of concern and something else, something that sent a shiver down her spine. "Hey, are you lost?" one of them called out, a tall man with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. "Yes. I've been trying to find my way back," Sarah replied, her voice strained with anxiety. "I was mapping geological formations, and then everything just went wrong." The second man, a stocky figure with a tattoo peeking out from under his flannel shirt, exchanged glances with the others. "You shouldn't be out here alone, especially not with the way things have been lately," he said, his tone casual but underpinned with an unsettling urgency. "Lately?" Sarah echoed, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Nothing to worry about," the third member, a woman with long, dark hair, interjected, her smile too wide, too quick. "We're just glad we found you. We've been looking for you." "Looking for me?" Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Why? What do you know about me?" "Oh, we know a lot," the woman said, taking a step closer, her eyes glinting with something that felt both inviting and malevolent. "You're the geologist, right? The one they said would come here." Sarah's heart sank. "Who said that? Who are you?" Before they could respond, the tall man motioned for her to follow them. "Come on, we'll help you get back. We'll explain everything on the way." With no other choice, Sarah hesitated only a moment before acquiescing. As they walked, the trio led her through the trees with an ease that suggested they knew the forest intimately. Sarah tried to gauge their intentions, but the more she observed, the more unsettling their behavior became. They exchanged whispers, glancing at her with knowing looks that made her stomach churn. "Is it true?" the stocky man asked, barely audible. "Do you really think she's the one?" "SHH. Don't say it out loud," the woman hissed, casting a wary glance at Sarah. "What are you talking about?" Sarah demanded, feeling a surge of indignation mixed with fear. "What do you mean, the one?" The tall man chuckled softly, a sound that felt more like a growl. "You'll find out soon enough. Just trust us." "Trust them?" The thought made her stomach twist. These people were strangers, yet they seemed to possess knowledge about her that she did not. The way they moved, the way they spoke, there was a rhythm to it that felt rehearsed. She was being led deeper into the forest, and she wasn't sure whether they were her rescuers or her captors. As they walked, the trees began to close in around them, the underbrush thickening with every step. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest was alive, and not in a comforting way. It felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Do you hear that?" Sarah suddenly asked, stopping in her tracks. The others paused, their eyes narrowing as they listened. Silence enveloped them, but Sarah could feel the tension in the air. It was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Then, faintly at first, came the sound of chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing through the trees. "What is that?" she whispered, a chill running down her spine. The stocky man shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just the locals performing some rituals. Nothing to worry about." "Rituals?" Sarah's voice edged on incredulity. "What kind of rituals?" The tall man leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. "The kind that awaken things. Things that have been sleeping for a long time." Fear tightened its grip on Sarah's heart. "What are you talking about? What have you awakened?" The woman's eyes sparkled with a fervor that frightened her. "You'll see soon enough. You're part of this now, Sarah. You have something they need." "What do I have?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I'm just a geologist. Just a geologist." The tall man laughed, a sound that echoed ominously in the trees. "You're more than that. The forest has chosen you." "Chosen?" Sarah shook her head, her mind racing with the implications. "You're all insane. I don't want to be part of whatever this is." "Too late for that," the stocky man replied, his voice low and menacing. "You're already in it." The chanting grew louder, reverberating through the forest, pulling her deeper into its dark embrace. Panic clawed at her throat. She had to get away from them, from this madness. She took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run. "Let me go," she shouted, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The woman reached out, grasping Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. "You can't escape what you are, Sarah. You are the key." "Key to what?" Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "What do you want from me?" The tall man leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "To awaken the ancient powers of the forest. To open the gateway." Sarah's mind raced with fear and confusion. "What gateway?" "What are you talking about?" Before they could answer, the ground shook again, more violently this time, as if the forest itself was responding to their words. The trees swayed, and Sarah felt a primal instinct take over. She yanked her arm free from the woman's grip and turned to run. "Sarah," the tall man yelled, but she didn't look back. She sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at her arms and legs as she pushed through the underbrush, desperate to escape the truth they had revealed. The chanting grew fainter behind her, but the sense of being hunted only intensified. She could feel the forest closing in around her, the shadows stretching long and dark, threatening to swallow her whole. She stumbled over roots and rocks, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she fought to maintain her focus. "Please, let me find a way out," she whispered to herself, fear propelling her forward. The trees blurred past her, a dizzying array of bark and leaves, and she felt as if she were running through a nightmare. Then, In a moment of clarity, she remembered the compass. It was malfunctioning, yes, but she could still use the sun to guide her. She had to find the direction of the setting sun to orient herself. With new determination, she forced herself to slow down, to breathe, to look for the sky through the branches. As she finally spotted a sliver of light peeking through the canopy, she set her course. It was then that she heard them again, the footsteps behind her, the whispers weaving through the trees. They were coming for her. "Run, Sarah," she urged herself, adrenaline surging as she pushed forward, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "You have to get away." But the forest was relentless. The shadows deepened, and the air thickened with a sense of dread. She could feel their presence closing in, and every instinct screamed at her to keep moving. She would not let them catch her. She would escape this madness. Determined, she pressed on, her heart racing, ready to confront whatever darkness lay ahead. In the depths of the forest, she would find her way back to safety, away from the chosen ones and their ancient secrets. She would survive this. As the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the towering trees of the Mark Twain National Forest, Sarah felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. The group of locals, 3 men and a woman, surrounded her, their faces partly obscured by the shadows of the branches. They had claimed to be searching for her, but now their intentions were becoming increasingly clear. The glint in their eyes was unsettling, a spark of something she couldn't quite place. She took a step back, her heart racing, but the tall man with a scruffy beard moved closer, blocking her path. "Sarah, you've come so far," he said, his voice smooth yet dripping with a sinister undertone. "You're more than just a geologist, you're a beacon. The forest has chosen you." "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice trembling. "I just want to go home." The woman stepped forward, her smile disconcertingly wide. "Home? But you're already home, Sarah. This place, it's alive. It's ancient and powerful, and you are the key to awakening it." The words echoed in Sarah's mind, twisting and turning as she tried to comprehend their meaning. She had uncovered something incredible, something that connected her to the earth in ways she had never imagined. But now, the forest that had once been a site of discovery felt like a trap, closing in around her with every word they spoke. "Listen," one of the men said, his demeanor shifting from friendly to intense. "We know about the rock formation you found. The magnetite, it's not just rock. It's a gateway to another realm, a place filled with energy and life beyond our understanding. And you, Sarah, you are the one we've been waiting for." The realization hit her like a cold wave. The strange occurrences, the whispers she thought she had imagined, they were all leading to this moment. "You're insane," she replied, trying to mask her fear with defiance. "I'm not part of any ritual or cult. I'm just here for research." The bearded man chuckled, a low and unsettling sound that sent chills down her spine. "That's where you're wrong. You've already been drawn in. The forest has a way of choosing those who are meant to awaken its secrets." In that instant, Sarah felt the ground beneath her shift slightly, as if the earth itself was responding to their words. She glanced at the others, their expressions a mix of anticipation and fervor. Panic bubbled within her. She had to find a way out before it was too late. "No," she said, her voice steadier now. "I won't be part of this." The woman stepped closer, her eyes glistening with fervor. "You don't have a choice, Sarah. The ritual must be performed. The energies of the magnetite will help us transcend into a new existence. You will help us." Sarah's mind raced as she recalled her geological studies. The properties of magnetite were unique. It could influence magnetic fields. If only she could use that knowledge to her advantage. You think this rock can just open a portal? She challenged, her heart pounding. What makes you think it won't destroy you? The man with the scruffy beard smirked, revealing a set of crooked teeth. We're not afraid of destruction, dear Sarah. We are ready for rebirth. All we need is the right catalyst. Before she could respond, the group began to move, forming a circle around her. They chanted softly, their voices melding into an eerie harmony that resonated through the trees. Each word seemed to vibrate in the air, sending tingles down Sarah's spine. She felt the magnetic pull of the forest intensifying, the energy alive and crackling around her. Stop! Sarah shouted, feeling the panic rise. She focused on the magnetite rock formation she had discovered. You don't understand what you're tampering with. The circle of cultists continued their incantation, undeterred by her protests. The ground shook slightly, and Sarah could see the shadows of the trees stretching and twisting unnaturally, as if responding to the dark energy being summoned. Clenching her fists, she remembered her training, digging deep into her knowledge of geology and magnetism. Okay, she said, her voice rising above the chanting. If you want to harness the energy of the magnetite, you need to understand how it works. The chanting faltered briefly, and she seized the moment. You can't just force it open. The energy has to be balanced. If you push too hard, you could collapse the gateway. Enough, the woman hissed, eyes narrowing. We don't need your guidance. We're ready. No. You don't understand what you're doing. Sarah felt the magnetic forces swirling around her, and she took a deep breath, mustering every ounce of courage she had. You think you can control this? You think you can wield the forces of the universe without consequences? The men hesitated, glancing at one another, uncertainty creeping into their expressions. Sarah pressed on, her voice steady now, filled with conviction. Let me show you how to channel it properly. We can use the magnetism to create a focused energy release. But you have to trust me. The bearded man's expression hardened, but the woman seemed intrigued. What do you propose? Sarah stepped forward, her heart racing but her mind clear. Let me take you to the rock formation. I can demonstrate how the energy works. If we don't do it right, we risk everything, your lives, my life, and the balance of this entire forest. After a long pause, the man relented, though his eyes were filled with skepticism. Fine. Lead the way. But you'd better not try anything funny. As they moved through the dense underbrush, Sarah felt the weight of their gaze on her, their expectations heavy and suffocating. The path felt longer than it should, her mind racing with plans and contingencies, desperate to find a way out of this nightmare. When they reached the rock formation, the atmosphere shifted. The air was thick with energy, and the magnetite glimmered under the dim light filtering through the trees. Sarah could feel the pull of the earth beneath her, the very essence of the forest alive and aware. Stand back, she commanded, taking a deep breath. She focused her energy on the rock, recalling everything she had studied about magnetic fields and energy flow. If we're going to do this, we need to create a circuit, a flow of energy that won't destabilize the area. The cultists watched her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. She gestured for them to create a circle around her, positioning themselves at the cardinal points. We need to align ourselves with the energy of the earth, she instructed. Close your eyes and feel the vibrations. As they complied, Sarah closed her eyes as well, tuning into the frequency of the magnetite. She envisioned the energy flowing through her, connecting her with the forest. Slowly, she began to chant, a rhythmic incantation that echoed the sounds of the forest. For a moment, she felt a connection building, a harmony between the natural world and her own heartbeat. Now, focus your energy, she urged. channel it towards the rock. The group hesitated, uncertainty creeping back into their actions. What if it goes wrong? One of the men whispered. Trust me, Sarah shouted, her voice breaking through their doubts. We have to do this together. As they concentrated, she visualized the magnetite glowing brighter, the energy pulsating through the circle. The ground trembled beneath them, and she could feel the magnetic forces responding, swirling around her like a tempest. Keep going, she encouraged, her heart racing. We're almost there. But just as it seemed the energy was building towards a breakthrough, the ground beneath her feet began to shake violently. A rumbling echoed through the forest, and the cultists exchanged panicked glances. The air crackled with tension, and Sarah realized they were pushing too hard. Stop. We need to stabilize it, she shouted, but the group was caught in a frenzy, their eyes wide with fear and excitement. The energy surged, and Sarah could see the magnetite glowing ominously, a portal beginning to flicker at its core. No. We have to close it, she cried, desperation clawing at her throat. She reached out, trying to pull the energy back, but it was too late. The portal erupted, a blinding light filling the clearing as shadows danced wildly around them. In that moment, she understood. The forest wasn't just a collection of trees and rocks, it was a living entity, and they had awakened something far beyond their comprehension. The cultists screamed as the energy spiraled out of control, a vortex of chaos consuming the very air around them. Help me, one of the men shouted, but Sarah couldn't see him through the blinding light. She focused on the rock, gathering her strength, desperate to collapse the gateway before it consumed everything. With a final surge of determination, she reached into the heart of the magnetic energy, using her knowledge of geology to manipulate the forces at play. I command you to return, she bellowed, her voice strong and unwavering. The light flickered, and for a moment, the chaos paused. Time seemed to stand still as Sarah's will clashed against the energy swirling around her. With one final push, she felt the magnetic forces shift, pulling back, collapsing the portal with a deafening roar. The ground shook violently, and the cultists were thrown back, tumbling to the ground as the light faded. Sarah gasped. In the heart of Yosemite National Park, the night draped itself over the towering pines like a thick, black velvet curtain. The moon, a silver sliver, peeked through the leaves, casting a ghostly glow that danced on the forest floor. Mike, a dedicated ranger, lay in his small cabin, the familiar sounds of the wilderness surrounding him. The soft rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl normally lulled him to sleep, but tonight was different. A pungent scent of smoke invaded his dreams, pulling him from the depths of slumber. With a jolt, Mike sat upright, his heart pounding. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of his dream. The scent was unmistakable. It was the smell of burning wood, a smell he had come to associate with danger in the park. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up, the wooden floor cool against his feet. Grabbing his flashlight, he headed for the door, feeling an uneasy flutter in his stomach. Outside, the air was thick with tension as he stepped into the shadowy woods. The moonlight struggled to penetrate the canopy above, and the trees loomed like silent sentinels. The familiar sounds of nighttime wildlife were muted, replaced by an eerie silence that heightened his senses. Mike clicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, revealing the twisted trunks and gnarled roots of the ancient trees. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the smell of smoke clung to the air, filling his nostrils with a sense of foreboding. Just a patrol, he muttered to himself, trying to quell the unease that gnawed at him. He pushed forward, the beam of light dancing across the forest floor as he scanned the horizon for any signs of flames. The night felt alive, the shadows shifting in a way that made him question whether he was truly alone. He moved deeper into the woods, his senses on high alert. As he walked, the smell of smoke intensified, swirling around him like a phantom. It seemed to beckon him further into the depths of the forest. He paused, straining his ears for any sounds, but all he could hear was the soft crunch of leaves beneath his boots. The sensation of being watched prickled at the back of his neck, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. The only response was the whisper of the wind, a sound that felt almost conspiratorial. He took another step, the flashlight illuminating a cluster of ferns that seemed to sway in the absence of any breeze. "Come on, Mike. Get a grip," he scolded himself, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. Just then, a rustle in the bushes nearby made him jump. He swung his flashlight toward the sound, heart racing. The light revealed nothing but the swaying branches of a nearby tree. He pressed on, the darkness thickening around him. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of the wind felt magnified, as if the forest was alive and breathing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached a small clearing. He paused, taking a moment to catch his breath, the smell of smoke stronger than ever. It hung in the air like a warning, and his instincts screamed at him to turn back, but something compelled him to stay. As the first light of dawn began to break, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mike reluctantly turned back toward his cabin. The forest slowly revealed itself in the soft light, and he could finally see the beauty around him, the towering trees, the vibrant underbrush, the gentle curves of the land. But even as the sun rose, his unease lingered. Once inside his cabin, Mike switched on the small television he kept for emergencies. The screen flickered to life, and his heart sank as he saw the news anchor's serious expression. Breaking news from the outskirts of Yosemite National Park, the anchor stated gravely, the words heavy with urgency. A massive forest fire has erupted approximately 30 miles from the park, fueled by dry conditions and strong winds. Authorities are urging residents and visitors to evacuate the area immediately. Mike's breath caught in his throat, and he felt a chill run down his spine. The smoke he had sensed wasn't just a figment of his imagination, it was a harbinger of something much more sinister. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was trying to tell him something, that the very land he loved was in turmoil. "Damn it," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. He had always respected the park and its secrets, but this was different. This felt personal. He grabbed his jacket and headed back outside, determination coursing through him. He would need to report this and prepare for whatever was to come. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, the sun began to rise higher, casting long shadows across the ground. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, the reality of the situation settling in. He needed to meet with Sarah, his fellow ranger and trusted partner. They had shared countless patrols together, and he knew she would want to know about the fire. Mike made his way to the ranger station, the familiar path feeling almost foreign with the weight of impending dread hanging over him. He pushed the door open, the familiar scent of pine and coffee greeting him. Sarah was already there, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied a map spread out on the table. "Mike, you're here just in time," she said, looking up as he entered. "I was just going over the areas we need to monitor. Have you heard about the fire?" "Yeah," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I smelled smoke last night. I thought it was just my imagination, but it seems I wasn't wrong." Sarah's eyes widened, and she leaned closer to him, concern etched on her face. "What do you mean you smelled smoke? You were patrolling alone? That's dangerous." "I know," he admitted, running a hand along the back of his neck. "But it was strong, Sarah. I felt like I had to investigate." She sighed, a mix of frustration and admiration. You need to be careful, Mike. We need to stick together, especially with everything going on. There's more to this fire than meets the eye. What do you mean? He asked, intrigued. I've been hearing things, rumors about strange occurrences in the park, she said, her voice lowering as if someone might overhear. People have reported seeing odd lights in the woods at night, and there have been whispers of an old legend. Something about the spirits of the forest getting angry. The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and Mike felt a shiver run down his spine. Legend? You don't think this fire is connected to that, do you? Maybe, Sarah replied, her eyes narrowing as she studied him. We need to keep our eyes open. Let's patrol the area closest to the fire and see if we can gather any information. If there's something more going on, we need to be prepared. All right, Mike agreed, the adrenaline coursing through him again. Let's head out. Together, they gathered their gear, the camaraderie between them bolstering their spirits. As they stepped back into the sunlight, the beauty of the park surrounded them, but an undercurrent of tension lingered. In the distance, dark clouds loomed, hinting at the fire's ferocity. As they began their patrol, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far beyond their understanding. The forest felt different today, heavy with secrets waiting to be uncovered. And deep down, he sensed that the mystery of the park was just beginning to unravel, leading them down a path they were not prepared to face. The sun rose slowly over Yosemite National Park, casting golden rays through the towering pines and illuminating the rugged terrain. Mike stood outside his cabin, a mug of steaming coffee in hand, as he inhaled deeply the fresh morning air, still tinged with the remnants of smoke from the previous night. His mind replayed the unsettling encounter he had with the scent of fire in the darkness. Today, he would meet Sarah to discuss their strategy for the park, but the unease lingered, knotting his stomach. As he walked toward the ranger station, the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves surrounded him, a stark contrast to the heaviness he felt. The sun's warmth enveloped him, yet the shadow of the fire hung over his thoughts like a dark cloud. He arrived at the station, where Sarah was already waiting, poring over a map spread across the table. She looked up, her auburn hair catching the light, and greeted him with a warm smile that momentarily eased his worries. Mike. Good morning. Did you hear the news? She asked, her voice bright but laced with concern. Yeah, I saw the report, he replied, setting his coffee down. It's not just a fire, it's a disaster waiting to happen if we don't keep an eye on things. Sarah nodded, her brow furrowing. We need to patrol the areas near the fire and make sure everything is secure. If there are any hot spots, we can't let them ignite. Mike watched her as she spoke, admiring her dedication. They had worked together for years, and her passion for the park was infectious. Let's check the trails leading to the north side, he suggested. That's where the wind is blowing, and we might catch a whiff of something if it's still smoldering. Agreed, Sarah said, rolling out the map. Let's gear up and head out. They gathered their packs, ensuring they had their radios, water, and first aid kits before heading into the park. The path wound through the trees, the sounds of nature enveloping them. Birds flitted above, and the distant sound of a stream added a serene backdrop to their mission. However, Mike's mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of last night. As they hiked, the air turned cooler, and the forest grew denser. Mike felt a sense of foreboding settle in as they approached a clearing. It was there that they stumbled upon a strange sight. A charred tree, its bark blackened and crisp, stood defiantly among the living foliage. What caught their attention most was an unsettling symbol carved into its trunk, a spiral intertwined with jagged lines that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Do you see that? Sarah asked, stepping closer to examine the symbol. What do you think it means? Mike squinted at the mark, a shiver creeping down his spine. I've never seen anything like it before. It looks almost like a warning or a marker, Sarah suggested, tracing her fingers along the edges of the carving. Maybe it's a sign of something. We should document it. As Sarah pulled out her camera, Mike felt an inexplicable urge to look around, as if something or someone was watching them. He turned his gaze to the surrounding trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but nothing seemed amiss. The feeling of being observed was just a figment of his imagination, he tried to convince himself. Got it, Sarah said, snapping a picture. Let's keep moving. We need to get to the lookout point and monitor the air quality. The two continued their patrol, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest, usually alive with sounds, felt eerily quiet, as if it held its breath in anticipation. As they neared the lookout point, the weight of the atmosphere pressed down on them. Hey, Mike, Sarah called, pausing to catch her breath. Do you ever feel like there's something beneath the surface here? Like, I don't know, secrets that the park is hiding? Mike stopped and looked at her, surprised by her sudden contemplative mood. Sometimes, this place is ancient, and you can feel the history in the air. But what do you mean? I'm not sure, she replied thoughtfully. It's just that with the fire and now this symbol, it feels like we're on the brink of something bigger than us. Before Mike could respond, a crackle broke through the silence of the woods. A voice crackled through their radio. Ranger Mike, Ranger Sarah, do you copy? Over. Copy, dispatch, Mike replied, raising the radio to his ear. What's going on? We've received reports of unusual sightings near the eastern ridge. You're advised to investigate before nightfall. There have been strange movements reported by hikers. Over. Understood, Mike said, glancing at Sarah, who looked equally concerned. We're on our way. He switched off the radio, the weight of urgency pressing down on them. We need to check this out. Strange sightings usually mean something is off in the park. Let's go, Sarah agreed, determination in her voice. They quickened their pace, moving deeper into the forest toward the eastern ridge. As the sun began its descent, shadows lengthened, and the air grew cooler. The vibrant colors of the day faded, giving way to a palette of blues and grays that wrapped around them like a shroud. The atmosphere felt charged, and Mike couldn't help but glance over his shoulder, expecting to see something lurking just out of sight. Do you think it could be a bear or something? Sarah asked, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Maybe, Mike replied, though he felt a creeping sense of dread. But bears don't usually scare hikers into abandoning their gear. As they approached the ridge, the trees thinned, and they caught sight of a small clearing. The remnants of a campsite lay ahead. It was abandoned, with a fire pit surrounded by rocks, its ash still warm. Mike's heart raced as he scanned the area for any signs of life. This doesn't look good, he muttered. Sarah stepped closer to the campsite, her eyes widening as she took in the chaos. Look at this, Mike. It's as if they just left. She pointed to a backpack overturned on the ground, its contents strewn about, a water bottle, half-eaten food, and a jacket. Yeah, and what about that? Mike gestured toward a set of footprints leading away from the site, half sunken into the ground, as if the person had rushed away. They didn't just leave, they ran. A chill ran through the air, and Mike's instincts kicked in. We should check the area for anyone who might need help. As they searched the surroundings, Sarah picked up a crumpled piece of paper. Hey, look at this, she called, unfolding it carefully. It's a journal. Let me see, Mike said, stepping over to her. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, detailing the writer's fear of something watching them, of fire worship, and a curse that haunted the park. "The spirits are angry," Sarah read aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "They demand respect. The fire is their warning." Mike felt a chill grasp at his heart. This is insane. It's just a legend, right? "Maybe," she replied, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "But something about this feels real. We need to take this back." Just then, a rustling noise emerged from the bushes, causing both rangers to freeze in place. Mike's heart pounded as he exchanged a wary glance with Sarah. Before they could react, a shadow darted between the trees, moving too quickly to identify. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "I don't know," Mike replied, adrenaline rushing through him. "But we need to get back to the station and report this." They hurriedly gathered their things, but the unease settled deeper within Mike. The day had taken a turn into the unknown, and he felt the weight of the park's secrets pressing in on them. As they made their way back through the forest, the fading light cast elongated shadows that danced around them, and the whispers of the trees seemed to carry tales of caution, warnings from a world beyond their comprehension. The air was thick with an unsettling silence as Mike and Sarah trekked deeper into the heart of Yosemite National Park, their footsteps muted by the carpet of pine needles and damp earth beneath them. The remnants of the previous day's tension lay heavily on their shoulders, an invisible weight that made the morning light feel more like a harbinger of dread than a promise of safety. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence with a hint of skepticism in her voice. She glanced around, her keen eyes scanning the towering trees that seemed to loom over them like ancient sentinels. "I mean, an abandoned campsite in the middle of nowhere? It feels off." Mike nodded, his brow furrowed as he held the map in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The radio call mentioned unusual sightings near the old trailhead. "If there was any sign of a struggle or something strange, we need to find it." As they continued, the sunlight filtered through the branches above, casting a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor. Each step felt laden with anticipation, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to unfold. The scent of pine mingled with the lingering traces of smoke from the fire that had erupted nearby, a reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond their immediate surroundings. After several minutes of hiking, they finally stumbled upon the campsite. It was eerily deserted, with remnants of a fire pit surrounded by charred stones and a few scattered logs. The scene was disquieting. It looked as if it had been abandoned in haste. "Look at this," Sarah said, kneeling down to inspect a torn backpack half buried in the underbrush. She pulled it out, revealing its contents, a couple of frayed granola bars, a water bottle, and a worn-out map. The map was marked with erratic lines and strange symbols. Mike crouched beside her, his heart racing. "This doesn't look like the gear of someone who was just camping for the weekend." Sarah flipped through the pages of the waterlogged journal she found tucked into the backpack. These entries, they mention fire worship and a curse. "Listen to this, the spirits are angry. They demand a sacrifice to appease the flames that burn with rage." Mike felt a shiver run down his spine. It's just a story, right? Legends to scare kids around the campfire? He tried to brush it off, but the unease prickled at the back of his mind. Maybe, but look at the date on this last entry. Sarah pointed to a scribbled date that was just days before the fire had broken out. It's too coincidental. As they examined the campsite further, they uncovered more unsettling artifacts, a necklace made of animal bones, a small, intricately carved totem, and a series of odd symbols etched into the surrounding trees. Each item seemed to whisper secrets of ancient rituals and beliefs, intensifying the heavy atmosphere that surrounded them. "Do you think this is why the fire happened?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. What if this is all connected to the legends we heard from the locals? Before Mike could respond, a sudden rustling in the nearby bushes made both of them freeze. They exchanged alarmed glances, their hearts pounding in sync with the growing tension in the air. The sound was unmistakable. Something was moving just beyond their line of sight. Did you hear that? Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. Yeah, Mike replied, his voice low. Stay close. They edged closer to the sound, their flashlights beam flickering nervously over the underbrush. Just as they were about to call out, a shadowy figure darted between the trees, disappearing into the dense foliage. The movement was quick, almost ghost-like, and it sent a chill racing down Mike's spine. Did you see that? Mike asked, his voice laced with urgency. Of course I did. What was that? Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as they both turned to face the direction the figure had gone. I don't know, but we have to check it out, Mike said, a mix of curiosity and fear compelling him to move forward. They cautiously approached the spot where the figure had vanished, their senses heightened, the forest now feeling like an entirely different world, one that was alive with unseen threats. With each step, the air thickened around them, the sounds of the wilderness fading into an eerie stillness. Mike's flashlight beam danced erratically over the trees, illuminating gnarled roots and twisted branches, but revealing nothing of the shadow that had slipped away. Do you think it was a person? Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Could be, Mike replied, though he felt a gnawing doubt. But something tells me it's not just a lost hiker. Suddenly, Mike's flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering before plunging them into darkness. He cursed under his breath and shook the device, trying to coax it back to life. Just as he was about to give up, the light flickered back on, but not before catching a glimpse of something moving in the corner of his eye. Did you see that? He exclaimed, pointing in the direction of the movement. What? What did you see? Sarah's voice was tight with fear. There was something there, behind that tree. Mike hurriedly made his way toward the tree, his heart racing. He could feel Sarah's presence close behind him, her breath quickening as they both approached the looming trunk. They circled the tree, but found nothing. The underbrush lay undisturbed, the only sound their own breaths echoing in the stillness. Mike's heartbeat thundered in his ears, and he turned to Sarah, desperation etched on his face. I don't like this. We should go back, he said, his voice low and shaky. Agreed, Sarah replied, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting the figure to emerge from the shadows at any moment. Just as they began to retrace their steps, a sudden gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and causing the branches to creak ominously. It felt as if the forest itself was awakening, a living entity responding to their presence. Did you feel that? Mike asked, a cold shiver running down his spine. Yeah, it's like the air changed, Sarah replied, her eyes darting around, searching for anything out of the ordinary. As they moved briskly back toward the campsite, Mike couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods, once familiar and comforting, now felt alien and threatening. The stories of the park's haunted past echoed in his mind, blending with the unsettling artifacts they had discovered. Once they reached the campsite, they quickly gathered the items they had found, their urgency spurred by the growing sense of dread that enveloped them. Let's get this stuff back to the ranger station, Mike urged, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling within him. We need to report this. Right. If there's a connection to the fire, we have to inform the others, Sarah agreed, her resolve strengthening as they prepared to leave. Just as they were about to step away from the eerie remnants of the campsite, a loud crack echoed through the trees, reverberating like distant thunder. They both froze, hearts racing, as the ground seemed to shudder beneath them. What was that? Sarah breathed, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know, but we need to move, now. Mike urged, adrenaline coursing through him. They began to hurry back through the forest, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on them like the gathering storm clouds above. As they navigated the winding trail, Mike glanced back over his shoulder, half expecting to see the shadowy figure pursuing them. The forest felt like a maze, each turn leading them deeper into an unknown realm fraught with danger and mystery. Do you think we're in danger? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Mike admitted, the uncertainty gnawing at him. But we can't ignore what we found. We have to figure this out before it's too late. As they pressed on, the darkening sky overhead mirrored the turmoil within them, and the weight of the unknown loomed larger with each step. The legends of the park were no longer just stories, they were becoming a haunting reality, one that threatened to consume them whole. In the dimly lit ranger station, the air was thick with tension as Mike and Sarah gathered around a small table cluttered with maps and notes. The faint hum of the fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, echoing their unease. Mike leaned forward, his brow furrowed, the remnants of their earlier discoveries still fresh in his mind. Did you see the look on the supervisor's face? He began, his voice low. He brushed us off like we were crazy. A charred tree with a symbol carved into it isn't something to ignore, especially not with that fire raging 30 miles away. Sarah crossed her arms, her expression a mix of frustration and concern. I know. It's like he doesn't want to acknowledge that something strange is happening here. We can't just sit back and wait for the next disaster to strike. Mike nodded, his eyes narrowing as he recalled the eerie campsite they had found earlier that day. If the fire was a warning, then we need to understand what it means. That journal had entries about fire worship and curses. What if there's more to it? Then we need to go back, Sarah declared, her resolve hardening. We can't let this go. We need to investigate tonight. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest, Mike and Sarah prepared for their nighttime excursion. They gathered flashlights, extra batteries, and a first aid kit, the weight of their gear reflecting the growing burden of their mission. As they stepped outside, the air turned cooler, and the forest around them transformed into a realm of whispers and shadows. Do you think we should have told the supervisor where we're going? Mike asked, glancing back at the ranger station, its lights dimming behind them. No, Sarah replied firmly. We need to do this on our own. If we find something significant, we'll bring it to him, but right now, he'd only hinder us. They hiked along the narrow trail, the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot the only sounds breaking the oppressive silence of the night. The moon hung low, casting a silvery glow through the trees, illuminating their path but also deepening the shadows that danced among the trunks. Do you believe in any of that stuff? Mike asked, breaking the silence as they walked. The curse, the spirits? I don't know, Sarah admitted, her voice thoughtful. Part of me wants to dismiss it as folklore, but then I remember how things have felt lately, like we're being watched. The way the forest seems to come alive at night. Yeah, I felt that too, Mike said, a shiver running down his spine. There's something unsettling about it. They soon reached the clearing where the abandoned campsite lay. The remains of the fire pit were cold and dark, the ashes whispering tales of the past. Mike swept his flashlight over the ground, illuminating the scattered debris, the remnants of a hasty departure, the artifacts left behind like echoes of fear. Let's split up and look for anything we might have missed earlier, Sarah suggested, her voice steady despite the chill in the air. All right. Just stay within earshot, Mike cautioned, his instincts prickling. As they moved about the campsite, Mike's flashlight beam danced over the ground, revealing more hidden secrets, a broken tent stake, a torn piece of fabric caught on a low branch, and scraps of food that had been abandoned. He paused, kneeling to inspect a small object partially buried in the dirt. "Hey, Sarah. Come here," he called, excitement creeping into his voice. She hurried over, her flashlight beam joining his. "What did you find?" Mike brushed the dirt away, revealing a small, intricately carved totem. The figure depicted a face with exaggerated features, eyes wide and mouth open in a silent scream. He felt a shiver of recognition as he recalled similar symbols from the journal. "This looks like the carvings from the tree we found earlier." "That's unsettling," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think it's connected to the fire?" Before Mike could respond, a rustling sound interrupted their conversation. Both rangers turned sharply toward the noise, their flashlights illuminating the darkness. A shadow darted between the trees just beyond the clearing, moving swiftly and silently. "Did you see that?" Mike's heart raced. "Yeah," Sarah replied, her voice tense. "What was that?" "Maybe it's just an animal," Mike began, but the words felt hollow. The unease settled in his stomach like a stone. "Let's stay close." They resumed their search, but anxiety hung heavy in the air. The forest felt alive, the shadows stretching and shifting as if they had a mind of their own. They exchanged glances, the unspoken apprehension between them growing more palpable with each passing moment. "Let's check the perimeter of the campsite," Sarah suggested, her eyes scanning the tree line. "We might find more clues." They moved cautiously, the beam of their flashlights piercing the darkness like fragile lifelines. As they rounded the edge of the clearing, Mike's attention was drawn to a flicker of movement at the edge of the trees. "Sarah, look." He pointed, his pulse quickening. A figure stepped into the light, revealing a weathered man with a long beard and tattered clothing. His eyes were wild, filled with a strange intensity that sent a chill through Mike's bones. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, trying to mask his surprise. The man raised a hand, palm out, as if to calm them. "I mean no harm. I am just a wanderer, a guardian of these woods." "Guardian?" Sarah echoed, skepticism lacing her voice. "What do you mean?" "The park is a living entity," the hermit said, his voice low and gravelly. "It breathes, it watches, and it remembers. You seek knowledge of the fire, but you tread on sacred ground." "Sacred ground?" Mike asked, curiosity pushing through his apprehension. "What do you know about the fire?" The hermit stepped closer, his presence both unsettling and magnetic. "The fire is not merely a natural disaster. It is a message, a warning. The spirits of this land are angered, and they demand respect." "What do you mean, spirits?" Sarah pressed, her skepticism fading into intrigue. "Are you saying the fire is their doing?" "More than that," the hermit replied, his gaze piercing. "It is the consequence of those who forget the balance, those who take without giving back. You have disturbed something that should remain undisturbed." Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah, her expression mirroring his uncertainty. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "How can we help?" The hermit's eyes softened, and he lowered his voice, almost conspiratorially. "You must understand the history of this land. Only then can you comprehend the path forward. But beware, the forest does not take kindly to intruders." As the words hung in the air, a gust of wind rustled the branches overhead, sending a shiver down their spines. Mike felt an unshakable sense of foreboding settle around them, as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. "Can you tell us more?" Sarah urged, stepping closer to the hermit. But before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the forest, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The hermit's eyes widened, and he turned abruptly, glancing toward the deeper woods. "You must leave. Now. The spirits are restless." "Wait," Mike shouted as the man began to retreat into the shadows. "What should we do?" "Respect the land," the hermit called back, his figure vanishing into the darkness. "And remember, the forest knows your heart." Mike and Sarah stood frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on them. The forest around them felt charged, alive with an energy that both terrified and fascinated them. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with both fear and determination. "We need to get back to the station," Mike said, his mind racing. "We need to think about what we've learned, but we can't ignore that warning." As they hurried back through the forest, the shadows seemed to close in around them, and the whispers of the trees filled the air, a haunting reminder of the secrets held within the heart of Yosemite National Park. The night was far from over, and a storm was brewing, one that would test their courage and their very beliefs. The wind howled through the towering pines, creating an eerie melody that seemed to echo the unease settling in Mike's chest. He stood at the edge of the clearing, the last embers of their fire still glowing faintly on the ground, casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits. The hermit, an enigmatic figure draped in layers of weathered fabric, gazed into the darkening woods, his eyes reflecting a wisdom that transcended the years he had spent in isolation. "They're angry, you know," the hermit said, his voice gravelly yet melodic, like the rustling leaves. "The spirits of this land, they watch and they wait. The fire you saw, it wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a warning, a cry from those who once roamed these woods." Mike exchanged a glance with Sarah, who stood beside him, her brow furrowed in contemplation. They had come to the park to protect it, to ensure its beauty remained untouched. Yet here they were, entangled in a web of ancient legends and unsettling truths. The hermit's words lingered in the air, heavy with the implications of what they might face. "What do you mean by angry?" Mike asked, his voice steady, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his anxiety. "What happened here?" The hermit turned to face them fully, his weathered face illuminated by the dying light. "Long ago, before the forest became a park, there were rituals. Fires lit in honor of the land, offerings made to appease the spirits that dwell beneath the surface. But then came those who sought only to take lumberjacks, miners, and the like. They desecrated the land, and with their greed, they awakened the wrath of the unseen." Sarah stepped forward, intrigued yet skeptical. "Are you saying that the fires are a punishment? A response to what people have done?" "Exactly." The hermit's eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent shivers down Mike's spine. "This park is alive, a living entity that demands respect. It remembers the sins committed against it. The flames are not just a force of nature, they are a manifestation of the spirit's anger." A gust of wind swept through the clearing, sending a chill that wrapped around them like a shroud. Mike felt the weight of the hermit's words settle heavily in the air. This was no longer just about fire safety, it was about something deeper, something primal. The thought both scared and intrigued him. "What can we do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we appease these spirits?" The hermit took a step closer, his presence imposing yet oddly comforting. "There are rituals, ancient practices that can honor the spirits and restore balance. But it must come from the heart, with genuine intention. You must show them respect." Mike's mind raced as he contemplated their next steps. "What kind of ritual? How do we perform it?" The hermit reached into his tattered satchel, producing a small bundle of dried herbs and a weathered stone. "You will need these. The herbs will cleanse the space, and the stone will serve as a conduit between your world and theirs. But heed my warning, once you begin, the spirits will be aware of your presence. They may test you, challenge your resolve. With a resolute nod, Mike accepted the items, feeling the weight of the stone in his palm. It was smooth and cool, pulsing with an energy he couldn't quite place. He turned to Sarah, who met his gaze with a mixture of determination and apprehension. "Are we really going to do this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her eyes. "We have to," Mike replied, his voice firm. "If there's even a chance that this will help, we can't ignore it." As they prepared to begin the ritual, the wind picked up, swirling leaves around them like a cyclone of whispers. The atmosphere thickened, and Mike could feel an electric charge in the air, as if the forest itself were holding its breath in anticipation. They set up a small clearing, arranging the stones in a circle while the hermit instructed them on the proper way to cleanse the area with the herbs. As they scattered the dried leaves around the circle, the scent of sage and cedar filled the air, grounding them in the moment. The hermit watched intently, his expression serious. "Now, you must invoke the spirits. Speak to them, acknowledge their presence. Show them that you come with respect and humility." Mike took a deep breath, centering himself. He felt the weight of the forest around him, the towering trees standing as silent witnesses to their actions. "Spirits of this land," he began, his voice steady but reverberating with an undercurrent of anxiety, "we come before you not as intruders, but as guardians of this park. We seek to honor you and restore the balance that has been disturbed." Sarah joined him, her voice soft yet resolute. "We recognize the pain that has been caused and the anger that has risen from it. We ask for your forgiveness and guidance." As they spoke, the wind howled louder, swirling around them like a tempest. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, darting between the trees, as if the spirits were indeed listening. The atmosphere shifted, and the temperature dropped, sending chills racing down Mike's spine. "Keep going," the hermit urged, his voice low and steady. "You must be sincere. They will know your truth." Mike pressed on, feeling the weight of the moment. "We promise to protect this land, to honor its history and the spirits that dwell within. If there is a way to heal the rift, we are willing to learn." As he finished speaking, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing their small fire in an instant. The darkness closed in around them, enveloping them like a thick fog. Mike's heart raced as he reached for Sarah's hand, his pulse pounding in his ears. "What's happening?" Sarah exclaimed, her voice rising in panic. "Did we do something wrong?" The hermit remained calm, his eyes scanning the darkened woods. "It is a test. They are watching. Do not lose your focus." In the oppressive darkness, whispers began to swirl around them, unintelligible yet urgent. Mike strained to make sense of the sounds, feeling an ominous presence looming just beyond the veil of night. Shadows danced along the edges of the clearing, taunting them with their elusive forms. "Stay close," Mike urged, gripping Sarah's hand tighter. "We need to stand together." As they formed a united front, the whispers grew louder, swirling like a storm. The shadows that had once seemed harmless now took on a more menacing form, coalescing into shapes that flickered in and out of existence. Mike could feel his heart thudding in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through him as fear threatened to overtake his resolve. The hermit raised his arms, his voice rising above the din. "You must show your strength. The spirits want to see your determination." Mike's mind raced. He had to keep them focused, keep them grounded in purpose. "Spirits, we are here to honor you. We will not turn away. We seek to restore what has been broken." As he shouted into the void, the wind howled in response, a cacophony of sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. The shadows morphed, twisting into grotesque forms that flickered in and out of view, challenging their resolve. "Don't let them intimidate you," the hermit urged, his voice strong. "You must stand firm in your intent. With a surge of defiance, Mike stepped forward, feeling the weight of the stone in his hand, a tangible reminder of their purpose. We will not be afraid. We stand for the land, for those who came before us. We honor the spirits in their rightful place in this world. For a moment, the whispers paused, a heavy silence settling over the clearing. Mike's heart raced as he strained to hear any sign of the spirit's response. But just as hope flickered, a new sound emerged, a low growl that resonated through the darkness, sending chills down his spine. "Stay together," Sarah shouted, her voice almost drowned out by the rising wind. "We have to finish what we started." With a fierce determination, Mike raised the stone high above his head, channeling all his energy into the moment. "We call upon you, spirits of the land. We seek forgiveness and understanding. We are your guardians, and we will not falter." As if in response, the growl intensified, reverberating through the trees as the shadows coalesced into a towering form, dark and menacing. The air crackled with energy, and Mike felt the very essence of the forest pulse around them, alive with a power that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "Keep your focus," the hermit shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You must believe in your purpose." In that moment, as fear threatened to overwhelm him, Mike remembered their mission. They were here to protect the land, to honor the spirits that had once roamed these woods. With that thought anchoring him, he shouted into the void once more, "We will not be afraid. We stand for you, we stand with you." The growl turned to a roar, and the shadows surged forward, a wave of darkness that threatened to engulf them. But Mike held his ground, feeling the warmth of Sarah's hand in his, grounding him in the present. Together, they faced the storm, their hearts beating in unison as they committed to their purpose. And in that moment, as the shadows closed in, something shifted. The night in Yosemite National Park was eerily silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on Mike like a heavy shroud. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding in his chest, the darkness around him seeming to pulse with an unseen energy. The whispers had started softly, like a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, but now they crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, each one laced with urgency, beckoning him deeper into the woods. "Sarah," he called out, his voice quivering as it echoed into the night. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing against his back, urging him to turn and flee, but he couldn't abandon her. Not like this. Moments earlier, they had stood together, their flashlights illuminating the clearing where they had intended to perform the ritual. Now, the flickering light seemed frail against the encroaching shadows. "I'll be right back," Sarah had assured him, her eyes reflecting a strange glimmer that he couldn't quite decipher. But the moment she stepped into the trees, it was as if she had been swallowed by the night itself. "Stay close," he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. The forest responded with an unsettling stillness, the whispers receding momentarily as if they were holding their breath. He felt a chill run down his spine, an instinctual response to the primal fear that gripped him. Mike took a step forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick blackness. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground beneath him was reluctant to let him pass. The trees loomed over him, gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. He called for Sarah again, but all he received in return was the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl, a sound that felt more ominous than reassuring. Panic surged within him. He knew the forest well, he had patrolled these trails for years, yet tonight, everything felt foreign, suffused with an energy that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. "Sarah," he yelled one last time, the sound of her name hanging in the air, a desperate plea for her return. Then he heard it. A faint sound, not far from where he stood. It was a whisper, but not just any whisper. This one felt like it was spoken directly into his ear. Mike spun around, his flashlight beam dancing wildly, illuminating only trees and shadows. "Sarah," he ventured again, but the only response was the rustling of branches overhead, as if something was moving just out of sight. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Stay calm," he murmured, forcing himself to think clearly. He needed to find her. He needed to understand what was happening. The whispers grew louder again, swirling around him like a tempest. They spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but the urgency was palpable. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, aware of his presence, and somehow, it disapproved. As he pressed deeper into the trees, he recalled the hermit's warning about the park being a living entity. Was it true? Was the land itself reacting to their intrusion? The thought sent shivers down his spine. "Sarah," he shouted once more forcefully this time, his voice breaking through the oppressive silence. The weight of fear was almost suffocating as he stumbled over roots and uneven ground. He had to find her. He couldn't let whatever force had drawn her away take her too. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting between the trees, too swift to be human. He froze, the beam of his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Is that you?" he called, straining to see past the darkness. The figure, if it was a figure, slipped away, leaving only the echo of its passage. His heart raced as he followed, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The forest closed in around him, branches snagging at his clothes and hair. "Sarah," he shouted again, but the only reply was the cacophony of whispers, now a swirling tempest around him. He stumbled into a small clearing, breathless and disoriented. The moonlight broke through the canopy above, illuminating a patch of ground that seemed oddly untouched by the chaos of the forest. In the center, he spotted something glimmering, a pendant, caught in the underbrush. He knelt down, his fingers brushing against the cool metal. It was intricately designed, adorned with symbols that felt familiar yet alien. A chill ran through him as he remembered the strange symbol carved into the chart tree they had discovered earlier. Could this be connected? As he stood up, the whispers intensified, swirling around him like a storm. He felt an overwhelming urge to leave, yet something deeper compelled him to stay. "Sarah," he shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "Where are you?" Just then, he heard it, a faint sobbing sound, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Without thinking, he dashed toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. As he stepped through the thick foliage, the sobbing grew louder, more distinct. "Mike." It was Sarah's voice, trembling and filled with anguish. Relief flooded through him, but it was immediately tempered by a sense of foreboding. "Sarah." "I'm coming," he called, racing toward the sound. The path opened up to a small grove, and there she was, kneeling on the ground, her hands pressed to her face. He rushed to her side, dropping to his knees. "What happened? Are you okay?" Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with fear, glistening with unshed tears. "I don't know, Mike. I felt something pull me. I couldn't resist. It was like a voice inside my head, calling me." He glanced around, the shadows stretching ominously. "What do you mean? What did it say?" "I don't know." It was a feeling, a compulsion to come here. She pointed to the ground, and he followed her gaze. There, etched into the earth, were symbols similar to those on the pendant. They're the same as the ones in the journal. A realization hit him like a cold wave. "Sarah, what if you're connected to this? What if you..." Before he could finish, she stood abruptly, her eyes glazed over as if she were in a trance. "I can hear them, Mike. They want me to join them." "Join who?" He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. "Fight it, Sarah. You have to fight it. but she seemed lost, her gaze drifting into the depths of the forest. "They're calling me home," she whispered, her voice trembling as if she were caught in a dream. Panic surged through Mike. "No. You can't go, Sarah. You're not just a part of this. You're more than that." In that moment, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, enveloping them both. Shadows flickered at the edges of the grove, and Mike felt a strange energy coursing through the air, thick and electric. He had to break the spell, to bring her back to him. "Sarah, listen to me," he pleaded, desperation in his voice. "You're a ranger. You're a protector of this land. You can't let them take you." Gradually, her eyes focused on him, confusion clouding her features. "Mike, I don't understand. There's a curse, yes, but you're not bound to it. You have a choice." As the words hung between them, the whispers began to ebb, the shadows receding slightly. She blinked, as if waking from a dream. I can choose." "Yes," he urged, his heart pounding with hope. "You have to fight it. We can face this together." With a sudden clarity, Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing as she stepped back from the symbols on the ground. "I don't want to be a part of this. I want to help the park, not be consumed by it." The moment she stepped away, the air shifted. The shadows shrank back, and the whispers grew softer, retreating into the depths of the forest. Mike felt a wave of relief wash over him, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. "Let's get out of here," he said, taking her hand in his. "We need to find a way to break this curse once and for all." As they turned to leave, the shadows stirred again, but this time they seemed to swirl around them, no longer threatening but almost protective. Mike glanced back, his heart racing. "What now?" "I think," Sarah said slowly, "we need to confront the spirits, to show them we respect this land and its history. Maybe then they'll release us from this curse." With newfound determination, they stepped forward, hand in hand, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The whispers had quieted, but Mike could still feel the weight of the forest pressing in around them, a reminder that they were not alone. As they ventured deeper into the woods, a sense of purpose surged within them. They would uncover the truth and honor the spirits of the land, together. The night was far from over, and the true test of their resolve was just beginning.